we don't have to share it if,
Sure.
or we can always turn off the recording. So, but if we
Yeah.
don't start the recording, then there's no
Yeah.
chance of that either. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
well, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, about myself. First of all, thank you for being willing to have a conversation with me. I find it funny that I spend most of my weekday mornings listening with your voice in my headphones. And and this is not a person that I have actually had any interaction with, but I'm constantly listening to you. So it's kind of surreal to be able to get the chance to have a dialogue. Yeah, about myself. Well, first, I guess I could start with now and backtrack. I found your videos because I was interested in the Jordan Peterson whole movement, you could say, and I and I think I got suggested one of the Exodus seminar videos, and you were doing your analysis of whatever they're talking about. I forget. It was a while ago now. And your YouTube is an interesting one because I've shared you with family members and friends, but they somehow can't hop onto that train.
I can
Yeah,
understand that. I
yeah,
can understand that.
I've told them that I've shared with them that, you really have to find a moment to step on to the train. You know what I mean? Of the TLC,
Yeah,
lots of words that are being used that are sort of within that bubble. And so they're like, I
yeah,
have no idea what's being said or anything like that.
yeah.
But I guess I got interested in your videos because I that was during a time where I was going through a lot of sort of figuring out beliefs about certain doctrinal issues. I can take a step back and just say I'm a PK. I grew up in the church, and I had sort of the standard upbringing in a evangelical church, with my dad as a pastor. Everything was
How big
great.
was the church?
You know, we are a big church now, and it has been a steadily growing church.
Okay.
We have a few thousand now.
Okay.
So does that classify as a mega church?
Yes, over a
Okay.
thousand is usually the definition of a megachurch. But if
Okay,
you're in
over a
an
thousand.
evangelical church with 50 people or 500 people or 5,000 people, those are very different experiences.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it even for me today, it still feels like a small church because
Hmm.
I mean, semi-small because we have a lot of attendance, but maybe I'm plugged in well enough that I feel like there's a
Yeah,
community, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Of
yeah,
like if I go on a Sunday, I see people that I know and we're always, in each
yeah.
other's lives and talking and things like that.
And
But
that's something that people often don't realize with mega churches is that it's often true that there's sort of a core. It's different that way from different size churches because
Right,
sometimes a small church, it's only the core. And there's a
right,
few people that come and go, but it's mostly the core.
right.
But even with a mega church, there's often a core there that's
Yeah.
been there for a long time and other layers of the church come and go.
That's really true. Because I was even just a few weeks ago sitting in the service and I thought about all of the faces of the people around me and thought to myself, like, I actually don't know many of these people.
Yeah.
But I don't know how often. I'm always meeting people, by the way, that have been there 20 years. And I'm the pastor's son and you know what I mean? I'm meeting them for the first time. But yeah, what's interesting about that church is it's always been a steadily growing church, and I'm still there. My dad's the senior pastor there now. He wasn't always the senior pastor, but what's funny about our church is the founding pastor of our church. He is good friends with Rick Warren,
Oh, okay.
and so they planted those churches, Saddleback Church and
Uh,
North Point, sort of at the same time,
okay.
and sort of with the same sense and model, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And they're good friends. I mean, I have shot a wedding for the church, and Rick Warren was present at the wedding. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So it was like there's sort of a connection there
Was he
between.
wearing a Hawaiian shirt?
I can't remember. He probably was wearing something like that. It was the senior pastor's daughter who was getting married, and I was shooting their wedding video, and yeah, I was like, oh, there's Rick Warren. But it was growing up. my dad had become a pastor. He was sort of approached by the senior pastor to become a pastor at the church. And yeah, sort of growing up with the initial building, then I, wrote down a verse on the foundations of the bigger building, you know what I mean? And then
Hmm.
we had the big children's buildings, and now we're a few thousand. Um, and when I was growing up in church, faith was something that I would say I took to very naturally. I don't have a story that is like the standard PK rebellious. I don't really know what is the deal with that, why that's a sort of common thing, especially because in my circumstance, it might be because my dad didn't really force it, if that makes sense. He didn't have great expectations. He sort of just did his thing, and I sort of tagged along, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
But
Hmm. That's,
anyway, so
I just, for some reason, I was looking at John Piper, of course, as Abraham,
mhm,
who's sort of the sheep who went away.
yeah,
He's got another son who is a pastor. He's got another son who's a contractor. And
yeah,
so you do get that dynamic in PK
that is really
households.
interesting. Yeah, my this is a sidebar, but my wife, her parents, they were worship leaders at a variety of churches across the United States. Since then, her dad, my father-in-law, has gone through a radical deconstruction.
Oh,
And yeah, John Piper's son is one of his people that he, is always sharing videos with us about and stuff. So
wow.
anyway, so they were traveling musicians, so she grew up on the road and they would go to
Wow.
do different worship concerts at different churches and stuff like
Why is
that.
it always the musicians that are deconstructing? There's something to
Right.
that.
It
There is
is, yeah.
something to that.
The artist's brain, I mean, he's still a musician. He
Yeah.
now he goes and does yachts and stuff like that and
Wow.
events. But anyway, so at my church, growing up about high school age, I was really invested, I would say, in learning faith. I didn't have that many friends in high school. I went to a charter school that was out of my district and kind of far away. Like it was like a 40-minute drive every day and back. So when I'm on the bus doing that drive, or when I'm in my art classes, or what I have in my ears in my headphones is N.T. Wright lectures and and every Tim Keller sermon that's published on the Gospel in Life or whatever, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm this high schooler who loves listening to Tim Keller essentially at that time. Um, then when after I got married and things like that, we um, took a trip to Israel. It was post-COVID, so we used our honeymoon money to go to Israel because we were going to go to all these places, and then we didn't manage to do that. So went to Israel. That was just mind-boggling, mind-bending. I came back and was just radically formed by that trip.
Hmm.
Um, and that sparked an immense fire of study in me, I would say.
Hmm.
Again, beforehand, I had had the Tim Keller and N.T. Wright, and
Yeah.
I was very passionate
Yeah.
about that stuff. But this sort of opened my brain up. And then right after that, we went to go. Sorry, just to back up, I am a media producer, so I work with organizations, nonprofits, businesses, churches, producing their communications, media development, things like that, so that they have
Okay.
videos to use for their online outreach.
Okay.
Anyway, so we got hired for a church, a Pentecostal church in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is across the United States, um, and from where I am. And that was my wife's first time in a Pentecostal church with like people on the floor and loud speaking in tongues from the front and things like that. So we were producing their videos. And our church is not like that. Her family is all independent Baptist and has a Mennonite background. So it was quite different for her. And, we're shooting and she's holding her camera and her eyes are just like, whoa. Yeah. And it's really funny. But it was amazing. And my dad grew up Pentecostal. So I had within my family, I wasn't as sort of culture shock moments. I didn't have that many culture shock moments, but it was different, especially when the pastor is, telling me, "I know you're going to speak in tongues. I know these things are going to happen." You know what I mean? And like, and it's like, and I'm sitting there at his kitchen table, and all I can do is respond and say, "You know what?" His name was Paul. you know what, Paul? You may be right. I don't know. You know,
Yep. Yep.
but that was a month after the Israel trip. And so it was like, okay, it's time for me to like work out what is all these different like doctrinal issues that I just am sort of not pinned down on, if that makes sense. Um, and so I went through like I'm a consumer, so I listen to a lot of things. I'm I sort of binge consume, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So I started doing all this investigating, and probably in that time period of investigating, as I found your videos, and then I had listened to the Jordan Peterson biblical series probably a couple years after that had released, and I had been familiar with JP for a while. But I wasn't aware of his effects in
Hmm.
what was happening and what were the conversations, the Vervaeke sphere, the Peugeot sphere, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and how it all sort of combines within the TLC, I would say, and I
Yeah.
don't know, something like that.
So
So
you,
now
so
I
you,
listen. Sorry, go
so
on.
I want to follow up with this about a little bit because you have some memory of this. A lot of people have been around a long time, or they find me and they start listening and they don't remember. So, you found some commentary on the Exodus, on some of the Exodus stuff,
Hmm.
and then you stayed.
Hmm.
Why? Because I can look at the analytics
Hmm.
and you know, because Peterson was just in the news because of that Jubilee thing. I mean, all
Right,
my analytics just went up. And of course, a
right.
lot of YouTubers have figured out, oh, if you do a video about Jordan Peterson, you're going to get like 10x the views in some cases.
Hmm.
So fair enough. You're chasing the views, you can chase that. But so a lot of people, even when I do make a video about Jordan Peterson, I would imagine just by looking at the analytics that a whole group of um, people will listen to me for that. But they don't necessarily all this other weird stuff. Just like you said, I tried to share your videos with some of my friends and
Right.
family, and they're like,
What's going on?
um, because we
Yeah.
are sort of all over the map. I mean, it makes sense to me because it's all sort of going through me in terms of the things I make videos about.
Right.
But do you have any idea why you sort of stuck with it? And
Yeah.
I mean, you actually know what TLC means, and it's a
Right.
fairly regular thing in my videos that someone will say, "What's the corner?" It's like,
Yeah. It took me a while to catch on to a lot of the things that you say in your videos. Like I actually thought Algo was a real person for a long time.
it
So
is.
right, I know, right?
Just doesn't
That's
have
funny.
skin on him.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. That's so funny. I was like, oh, so Algo is one of these people that he mentions, like, anyway. But like a member of the TLC in that way, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Where,
just right.
yeah, a human. I actually thought that. But no, what I think because it was in sort of a development period, a period of construction, not construction from deconstruction, but just sort of a forming period of
Yeah.
I think it was mostly because you were speaking to the Jordan Peterson way of talking about things, but from an actual confessional background, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
That makes
So it was
sense.
like a lot of pastoral figures, even my own dad, who has listened to quite a few of the Jordan Peterson stuff, he doesn't engage with it as rigorously. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so he went so far as to say, I think from the pulpit at one time, he was talking about Jordan Peterson, about the clip of Jordan Peterson crying, talking to Jonathan Pageau, and he said Jordan Peterson was talking to his pastor, and I was like, talking to his pastor, and I was
Kind
like,
of.
kind of,
Peugeot is kind of
I know,
Peterson's pastor.
I know, it's really funny, and I know he was sort of bringing the language down to how our
Yeah.
congregation would understand it,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
But I was like, he's not. I don't know. Anyway, but because it was this period of discovery, of learning, of thinking through things, Jordan Peterson has, and this has come up in the Jubilee thing, where he has his own way of talking about things, and he has
Yes.
the Peterson ism, like, is its own structure. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And you were making inroads into that and inroads out of that, I feel like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, for Christian thinking, I guess, or is like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
standard Christian doctrine. So it helped bring things together as far as what Peterson was talking about.
That makes sense.
So that's probably what made me
Yep.
stay. And what's funny about your videos is they often are commenting, they're often always commenting on things that I tend to care about, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so it was kind of funny when the Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God podcast came out. It was the same sort of deal where I was like,
Yeah.
this is like the Marvel Cinematic Universe for everything that I care about. Because I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
Justin Briley was interviewing like all the people that
Yep.
anyway, and they're all having a similar conversation. And anyway,
Yep.
so that's probably why I stuck
That
on.
makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry to divert you. Keep going.
No. Well, I don't really know where to pick up from there, except that if we're just talking about my background, like I said, I grew up as a PK. My dad is very influential as sort of the person who I have modeled my life after.
Mm,
So even though we have very different lives, we have radically different upbringings. His It's a very different story than mine. But him being a pastor and the way that our church is, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk is because our church is a mega church, as I have said,
yep.
but I'm trying to figure out what it means to integrate my upbringing with the sorts of things that are being discussed in the TLC and our church with the sort of things that are being discussed in the TLC because it's so focused on orthodoxy and it's so focused on traditions and all of these things. And I
Yeah.
just have these things where we're in a Southern Baptist church that no one would really know that if they came. It's functionally a non-denominational church. It's a big box. Um, and I mean, like, I'll be the first one to admit stylistically, it's not necessarily for me. But just because it's not for me doesn't mean that, and again, stylistically, doctrinally, I'm on level with them.
Yep.
But so there's a priority in the aesthetic these days, at least within these conversations about this embodiment,
Yep.
rituals, liturgy, things
Yep.
like that. We have the
Yep.
opposite of that. And I always wonder, like, is there any way to integrate these? Is there
Yeah.
any way, and would it even be right to do so, if that makes sense?
Well, if you go back 3 years, actually, this was if the Jordan Peterson Jubilee video hadn't blown, I was probably going to spend another couple of weeks on the megachurch movement
Yeah.
because if you go back 3 years, you can find a conversation with myself and a scholar named James Wellman,
Mm,
who wrote a book, High on God.
hmm
And I remember I interviewed him because I know Trip Parker, who Trip was a deacon at Mars Hill, Seattle.
mm,
So he rode that whole train. And James Wellman is really his church background is mainline, and he's a sociologist, I believe.
mm.
And he was actually studying churches. And his thesis of his book, High on God, is that even though sort of politically and confessionally, he's not really in sort of the mainline evangelical megachurch thing, he looks at those churches and says, in many ways, they're some of the best performing churches in America. And he doesn't mean just in terms of grabbing numbers of people that come there, but in terms of the service they do for the poor, in terms of the amount of support they give to families and marriages. And this is, the truth be told, even though I've always gone to small churches, with the possible exception of a church in that I was at college and seminary that went from a small church to a mega church in the time that I was there. So I rode that train up with the church and I became an elder of that church before I went to the mission field. But if Living Stones were to go away and the Christian Reformed Church went away, it could quite possibly be that I would go to a mega church somewhere in Sacramento
Mm,
just because I like mega church worship.
mm.
And for me, the size isn't daunting because I'm always able to carve out for myself a congregation within a bigger body.
Right.
And I think that's actually a lot of what happens in mega churches, but just like we were talking about before, it doesn't get much visibility. I know I know a guy who he and his wife used to go to this church and they moved to another area of town and then they stopped going to this church and they started going to a mega church and they went to this mega church and in this mega church they started with, mega churches are always working small groups. So then
Hmm.
they started a small group with that mega church. That small group en masse, probably about 25 people, has as a unit gone to different mega churches in their region.
Mm.
So when I heard that, I thought that is really interesting in terms of what's happening here.
Right.
Because in some ways, that small group is their church,
Right.
and they're not, I'm sure, these are all very faithful Christians. I'm sure that they're donating to these churches and supporting them financially, et cetera, et cetera, but they're acting like a body within an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Tim Keller quote that I played on the video that had Keller and Michael Horton was talking to Keller and the
Yeah.
Holy Post video was that in many ways the megachurches are an evolution of what the parachurches were and did and how they functioned
Mm.
in the late 20th century.
Yeah. I think
And
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
and it's not that the parachurches went away, but you also, in some ways, they're also the heir of revivalism in America, because of course,
Yeah.
one of the things that would happen with revivals is that you'd have great music, you'd have great preaching, and it was very effective in terms of moving people and moving people towards Christ and moving people towards reformation in terms of their character and their life and all of these things. And so then what happens, in the 20th century is that churches, basically what mega churches are mega churches have figured out a way to scale so that the revival is normalized instead
Yeah.
of just being. I spoke with someone recently who, McMo, he was talking about the fact he grew up in this little church, and every now and then in the South, and they'd have a revival. They'd get in a guest speaker and they'd pull out all the stops for music, but they could only sustain that for like a weekend or a
Right.
week. And what megachurches have managed to do is basically sustain that indefinitely and then build an ecosystem and a structure around that so that, for example, it was crusade protocol for, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, where you activate all these smaller churches when Billy Graham would come to town. And then, just as I am with that one plea, and then people would come forward, and then you would have Christians from those churches then begin the discipleship process with the people who came forward. So even though Billy Graham didn't stay in town, the churches of the town would get an evangelistic boost
Right.
by working with the crusade. And so
Yeah.
what in many cases the mega churches have done is sort of figured out how to normalize this and keep that evangelistic tool going
Right.
52 weeks a year in a
Yeah.
locale, which quite frankly is brilliant.
Yeah.
But there are challenges to that because
Hmm.
your little church sort of ramps up and everybody leans in and they do this thing for a week and afterwards they can kind of relax. Well, in the mega church you have to sustain that,
Right.
and so now suddenly that requires a level of professionalism, a level of organization, a level of intentionality, and that's going to have issues too. I remember when I got back to North America and I came to Sacramento and our whole classes was going out to Willow Creek. And so for the first 3 or 4 years while I was here, I did a lot of study into megachurch methodology because we were also doing church planting and a bunch of these things. And so, the fact that you don't just necessarily get to preach in a megachurch. You might have to audition your sermon in front of a bunch of people that are going
Mm.
to say, you don't make the cut for prime time.
Uh-huh.
And but the megachurch thing has continued to evolve too, ever since the early days of Saddleback and Willow Creek.
Right.
And and I know the megachurch gets a lot of flack from a lot of people. But what James Wellman's book really showed me was that it probably shouldn't. It probably should
Right.
get it already gets a lot of money. There's already, I mean, there's already a lot of people who participate in it, but it should probably get more respect than it
Right.
tends to get
Yes.
from, and I think part of the reason it doesn't get a lot of respect, let's say, from the old guard. And what I mean by the old guard are small church pastors and
Right.
denominational officials and seminary people, and then, Christian thinky talky people.
Right.
Quite frankly, I think some of that is envy
Mm.
because mega churches are really successful.
Right.
And don't discount the smallness of the human art. I mean,
Yeah.
if someone sees someone else doing better than them, doesn't take much for them to find a reason to
Right.
really be a jerk to them or to say nasty
Yeah.
things.
We have,
So I,
yeah.
I think, you know, but you're right. Just in terms of the growth and evolution of my channel, in terms of Jordan Peterson and then my relationship with Jonathan Peugeot, that, I mean, Jonathan
Yeah.
Peugeot and I talked when, he had maybe 4,000 subscribers and I had
Wow.
2,000 or 500 or
Wow.
something like that.
Wow.
So we were right at this together right from the start.
Yeah.
And so when that, and also for me, the Jordan Peterson phenomena was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But also the Orthodox moment, that's fascinating because
Yeah. I
there's a
mean, that's the more current thing, even than the Jordan Peterson thing, I feel like,
yeah,
is the
yeah,
Orthodox stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, what's happening there?
Yeah.
That's just plain weird. But I think now, after a few years, I really see it as sort of frankly, it's the continuation
Yeah.
of the emerging church movement
Yeah. That was
because
enlightening when you did those videos,
yeah,
for me, because I felt like you, because when I was coming up, the emergent church, it was like towards the end of its life. So I heard about Rachel Held Evans and things like that as I was a high schooler listening to Tim Keller and things like that. You know what I mean? And the spat between John Piper. Was it Rachel Held Evans and John
yes,
Piper? Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, yes,
And so well, and then when I was in high school, also I would go on like Relevant Magazine, their website
yes,
all the
yes,
time, right? And so they were kind of like
yeah,
that evangelical, like sort of like appealing to the left, or
yep,
like at least culture in general. So even the Q conference video that you did or whatever, when
yep,
you were commenting, I was like, this is so like, this is what great about your videos is they're always like connecting back to some, like they always come back around to something that I have thought about or dealt with in the past or something like that. And so, um, the thing about the emergent church that I learned is I have a lot of friends from my high school era. When I was in, sorry, I have a lot of friends from my high school era that are not in the church anymore.
yep,
When I was in high school, those friends, they were not high school kids. They were college students or older. That's how I sort of got integrated with my wife because she is 2.5 years older than me. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I was hanging out with the college group at our church. And nearly all of those individuals that I spent time with, they are no longer, they have deconstructed, if that makes sense.
yep,
And partly is that sort of emergent church does okay, so just to ask for clarification, does the emergent church have a sort of liberal theology bent or
yes.
does it not? Yes, it does. Okay.
As does, and this is gonna, people are gonna freak out when they hear this.
Uh-huh.
There's a
Right.
certain overlap
Yes.
between Orthodox theology and the liberal theology of the emerging
Right,
church.
because they don't have penalty substitutionary atonement and they
There's a lot
tend
of
towards universalism.
universalism.
Yeah, right. David Bentley Hart, right? He's a
Yep.
yeah, so
And
that's
Jordan
really interesting.
Peterson.
Right, and JP. Yeah, that's so funny. And I have that's like different because I have like thought about those people from the past, from my past, and I've thought like I wonder when I'm gonna find out that they are at an Orthodox church or something like that.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
if
And
they
not even a
go.
Catholic church because they have, I think part of the reason people that deconstructed go back into the Orthodox is because it's novel for them. When it's not a novel thing, it's just novel for them. And then and because it doesn't have the original sin, purgatory, it's got
Right.
the toll houses, but
It's
you know,
anti-Augustinian,
right,
and
exactly.
the Protestants and the Roman Catholics tend to be Augustinian.
Right,
But
right.
there's this whole segment of the Orthodox. If you look at someone like my friend Nathan Jacobs,
I listen to him all
Nathan,
the time. Yeah.
yeah, Nathan went to, Calvin Seminary, eventually started a PhD program, which was sort of crazy when they did it, but they've kept it going. And he goes through that program and then he joins the Orthodox Church. Basically, if you
Hmm.
listen to him, because he says, I think this route that Augustine takes in terms of what sort of becomes penal substitutionary atonement and
Hmm.
original sin and all these things, well, they sort of
Right.
reject that, as did liberal theology.
Yeah.
And
Which is ironic. Yeah. It's
but it's
ironic
also
because
been
liberal
the case,
theology, it comes out of Protestantism, but the
right?
Orthodox are so anti-Protestant. So
Right.
it's like, anyway,
Yeah.
sorry.
And it's also the case that the main line, I mean, it's actually a lot of Augustinianism that the main line rejected in their liberalizing. And I remember talking to some mainline pastors, and mainline pastors would tell me things like, you know, here's the thing about you conservative Protestants. You confessionalists hang together because of your doctrinal statements. The liturgy holds us together. I was told that about 15 years ago by a
Mm.
mainline pastor. And
Wow.
then when all these Orthodox people come on, it's like the liturgy, the liturgy, the liturgy. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
but yet. Is Jonathan Peugeot a liberal?
Right.
No, no.
No,
But
right.
if you
Yeah.
listen to Jonathan and you listen to Jordan and you listen to certain things, people get liberal vibes from
Right.
them sometimes, to the fact that even Woodford, rationality rules guy, he
Yeah.
has Peugeot on, and he's like, well, you don't really believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus. Yeah. And that's why I made that crying game video, because
Mm,
it's like, what's happening here? Who
right.
is this Peugeot? But
Yeah.
Peugeot has, and that's the funny thing about the Orthodox, is that I'm getting to the point now where I'm ready to not call them the Orthodox,
Mm,
because there's no. I'm really wondering
hmm.
how much the is there among
Right.
those people,
Yeah.
because they're just, there's not that many of them,
Right.
but they are freaking diverse,
Hmm.
especially confessionally, because again, confessionalism is not their bucket, because they didn't go through the European experience of the Reformation. So
Yeah.
confessionalism isn't their bucket. And so, well, what is their bucket? The icons, the beards, the
Right.
robes, the
Yeah, the
aesthetic.
aesthetic, right. Yeah. I
Yeah, I think
listened,
the
yeah.
aesthetic is
Yeah.
their bucket.
Yeah, I listened to a it's very interesting bringing this up because I recently listened to there's this new up and coming he was on Ruslan Protestant polemic guy who's his whole thing is against Roman Catholic doctrine and against Orthodox doctrine, his cleave to antiquity or something like that. And he did an interview with Joshua Shuping or something, who is an Orthodox priest who is now a Lutheran pastor.
Oh, that guy, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that
yeah,
guy, everybody's favorite guy in the ortho moment. What about that? He left.
right, right,
He
right. Exactly. He's
deconstructed his
the
orthodoxy and
exception,
became a Lutheran.
right? Exception to the rule of today's day. Is that individual. And he made this comment about, and obviously he probably has maybe a little bit of hurt, maybe a little bit of cynicism. I try to be an optimist. I try to be charitable as much as possible. But I gave that interview the time of day because I wanted to hear what he would say. And he said, the Orthodox, they either don't know what their doctrines, these Orthodox priests, they don't know what their canons say, or they're just hiding it. You know what I mean? About the fact that I think the example he gives is like if you if you actually go to what they say, what their canons or doctrines say. Like, yes, your Baptist grandmother is burning in hell. You know what I mean? And like they might be wishy-washy about that if you ask them. But what is written, what is the accepted, handed down tradition that they're cleaving to so intensely is like what again, and yeah, what is written. They don't,
To the degree
yeah,
that any of that is coherent instead
right,
of a warehouse where just about any theological position you want to find, you
exactly.
go back far enough and or broad enough, and you'll find somebody who believed it and wrote
That's
about it.
exactly why when I have explored any sort of just even form, I don't find myself leaving my church, or I don't anticipate that. But when I have explored what it would look like or what would be the reasons for, I have all to like jump into a completely different denomination like Orthodox. I'm sure everyone who's listened to your videos or Jonathan Pageau has had that question. What would it look like? Or why would I do this? Or what would keep me from doing this? One of the things that has I've been like has put a stopper on that is like my instinct towards something like sola scriptura, where it's like I need a dependable source of knowledge that I like can like go to and like have a sense that this is I can lean on this and not question it because someone else, some other authority said something else. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I hear these things about, well, this council was ruled in this way and then this council reversed it, and I'm like, so how are the councils infallible then if we go back and correct them? Um, yeah, I don't really understand. And I say this as someone who part of the reason, like I said, I one of the reasons why I wanted to connect with you is because you are paying attention to all of this very closely and trying to work it out and trying to discuss it in a way that is meaningful and constructive. And I think if I'm getting you right, moving towards something that maybe you don't even know. Um, I'm trying to figure out what that means on the ground for me, day in, day out, every Sunday morning. Um, Especially because it's so there's an angst against mega churches. And again, I'm like, well, we're not Elevation Church. You know what I mean? We're not like these, you know what I mean? Like, why are we drawing a box around my church and like why I don't belong in that box with Elevation
Yet
Church, you
I
know?
have a guy who I basically brought to Christ and discipled who he never really fit here at Living Stones, and so he went out and he listens to Furtick all the time. I mean, it's just it. I'd have people that come to my church on Sunday morning, and I remember one woman, African American woman, came here and said to me, you know what I love about you, Paul? What's that? Says, I still listen to Joel Osteen first thing in the
Hmm.
morning, and then I
Oh my
listen to
goodness.
you, and you say the same thing. And I just thought,
Wow.
there we go. Me and Joel Osteen saying the
That's
same thing.
That's crazy in regard to what I'm trying to use the words that you use correctly, relevance realization or first filter or something like that. They're hearing specific things and matching them up to what you would say from Joel
Yeah,
Osteen. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
That it's
Well,
like,
I think it's there. I mean, most I mean, as much as a pastor will seminary trains you to be a little bit careful with your theological terminology because that's what confessionalism is.
mm,
It's
mhm,
trying to create a system using language that points to doctrines and such. And so you use these words carefully. But the vast majority of people don't have that.
mhm,
And and so they will listen to a Joel Osteen sermon and they'll practice a little relevance realization. They'll take away two or three things from it.
right.
And they'll listen to me. They'll take away two or things
Exactly.
and they'll
Exactly.
put it
Yeah.
together and say, oh, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never even listened to Joel Osteen, maybe 5 minutes before. Like I don't even know what he says. I know what people say about him, but I don't even know what he actually says. So it might be true. Part of me asks, like, do people know what he says, the people who talk bad about him, you know? And I'm not casting doubt that he's a prosperity preacher. I've seen
Yeah,
his
yeah,
propaganda. You know what I mean? I have
yeah.
seen that. Um, but yeah, that is
People
really
listen
cool.
for a vibe.
Yeah. And I used
And
to, yeah,
yeah,
I
they
used
do.
to listen. Sorry.
That's how they work. And that's how people are.
Yeah. I listened to Stephen Furtick back in high school alongside Tim Keller and T. Wright, and he sounded quite, I don't know, he didn't sound wrong back then. I
I've
don't know
never
if I
listened
went
to a
back and
single
listened.
sermon he's preached.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know if he's changed or I don't know if and then they go wild and they have these like gotcha moments where he says, "I am God Almighty" on the stage. I don't know if you've seen that, but yeah, yeah, it happened.
Could be editing because Christian
Yeah,
YouTube is pretty vicious, and if you can
that's
and if
true.
Christian YouTube finds a way to sort of go after a
Hmm.
bigger name, that's worth lots of clicks and clout on YouTube.
Yeah, I guess my going back to the Rick Warren thing, he gets a lot of flack
Oh
on
yeah, yeah,
Christian YouTube.
yeah,
And as someone who I've never met him, but as someone whose senior pastor is close enough with him that, they go to each other's families' weddings.
yeah,
And I know my senior pastor, and I know that he values and trusts Rick Warren
yeah,
and the way that he does things. And I know that our senior pastor or our founding pastor, apologies, he was a solid pastor
yeah,
who built a solid church in an unchurched neighborhood of our city.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
A
Now
growing,
I mean Rick Warren's a solid guy. I
yeah,
you
I
know
that's
I
what I hear. And I just think it's really funny when I see smear messages on the internet. So
He's
anyway,
a solid guy. And
yeah.
and it doesn't mean you have to agree with everything he thinks or says or does or anything like that, but
Yeah.
he's a solid guy.
There are some things that he said that I have talked with my dad who has met Rick Warren, and I have been like, why did Rick say that? He said something about the thieves on the cross. This was recent. The thieves on the cross, they represent the left and the right, and Jesus stands in the middle. Yeah. And I was like, Dad, why did he say that? And my dad was like, I don't know why he said that. I don't like, and then he said, he comes from it. He is stuck in a generation that didn't care as much about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I was like, that's so interesting
I don't know.
because,
As a preacher, I've always found that it's the offhand comments that get me in trouble much more than
mm,
the stuff that I've sort of thought through. And it's
yeah,
just if you just like the book of Proverbs says, if you talk enough,
yeah,
you're
something's
gonna
gonna come
you're
out.
gonna sin with your words. It's gonna happen. And for those
Yeah,
of us who are verbose,
right.
that's
So my question that I wanted to ask, that I wanted to hear is there a place, in your opinion, is there a place to where like the genuine folks of this emergent church now entered the Orthodox?
yeah.
Is there any reconciliation between those folks and my megachurch? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a world of sense because the emerging church was a reaction against the seeker church.
Hmm. Right.
It
Right.
was okay. So let's follow up this thesis that we've developed that the seeker church grows out of revivalism and grows out of the desire to if you saw fruit in the revival, how much more fruit will you see if it's sort of like the jump from the carnival to Six Flags
Mm-hmm.
because at the carnival you got a Ferris wheel, you got the carousel, you got all this stuff. But Six Flags now suddenly, if you're not having to put everything in the back of a truck all the time, now you can set those roller coasters in cement and you can have tubes and twists and everything. And so you have Six Flags. And in some ways, that's what the megachurch is. But that requires a degree of industrialization. And this is one of the big difficulties of the church. And this isn't just true of mega churches. This is also true of ancient cathedrals for Catholic and Orthodox. And it's also true of Christian participation in empire, that what you have to do in order to sort of industrialize to scale is that you're going to have to the industry is going to have to use people, and there is going to be loss, and there is going to be hurt, and there are going to be compromises along the way. And part of what the emerging church movement is complex in that it, it's part of the reason that I think there are reasons why mega churches will never actually supplant or take the role of the main line, that the role that the main line played, because mega churches, because of its revivalist roots, I think mega churches are, they deliver with a certain psychotechnology, a kairos moment that is
Mm,
intended to put people on a trajectory.
right.
And again, these roots go, so revivalism in America goes way beyond just church and Christianity. It goes to the temperance movement, and it
Mm,
goes to the recovery movement. And all of these movements are basically lean into kairos in terms of a moment of decision, the anxious bench. And that's a powerful thing in terms of transformation because, you can, a drunk can go sober. A worldly person can become a saint. I mean, all of this can happen with that kairos technology, but that's a hard thing to maintain.
yeah.
And the advantage that the carnival and the wandering revival had was you were ginning it up,
Yeah.
but it was always fresh to the new town you were in.
Right.
And the show is never just the stage and the setting and the music. The show is also the people. And so if you're running the revival, there's a certain group of them that are the true believers and they can do it every day and they never burn out and they never get sick and they always believe and they never get cynical. But that's a segment. And a certain group of people is going to look at how the sausage is made and how the Kairos moment gets delivered. And they're going to point to all of the externalities that are that come out of this because there are
Right.
always externalities. And so part of it is that the point leader, the preacher, the celebrity, the megachurch pastor, this person is going to have placed on them a level of pressure and demand that few people can actually sustain.
Right.
And if they do so, and Billy Graham figured this out, to his credit. In
Mm,
order to sustain that, he had to scaffold around him certain basically spiritual disciplines
right.
fairly unique to him in order that he could perform within this overall ecosystem. Now, let's say, I mean, just look at, let's say, Bill Hybels. So Bill Hybels grows up in the Christian Reformed Church, really sort of from the Christian Reformed Church gets pulled into a broader evangelical milieu, is youth pastor at a successful Chicago area megachurch, and then youth ministry is also a piece of this, of course,
Absolutely.
because with revivalism, eventually they figured out, hey, some of those kids, they're kind of soft touches when they're young. They're not
Yeah.
cynical at all. They'll come forward. So,
Right.
so
Okay. Can
th
I stop you there
yes,
just
go
for a
right ahead.
second? I apologize.
No, don't apologize. I'm from New Jersey. We don't let ourselves talk this long. That's why the internet is way too polite to me.
Gotcha. There you go. Um, so speaking of children's ministry, so first of all, everything you're describing about revivalism is semi-true of our church. We don't drum up the emotionalism, which is kind of ironic about I heard growing up so much. Um, you don't want to manufacture worship. Um, and then I look at what liturgy is, and I'm like, wait, have Christians most for all of their history manufactured worship? Like, isn't that and hasn't didn't ancient Israel manufacture their worship at the temple? Like they literally built the temple as the command of God.
And they
So
didn't do it
what?
on the cheap.
Right, and they planned it out and they held like a festival and like they so it's like there was a oh, what was I listening to? There was something about the gentleman with the mustache. He is he's got a big mustache. I forget his name. Maybe
And
it's
the
Mark. I don't
TLC?
know. Yeah, TLC. And he was talking about how awful the Asbury revival was or
Oh,
something
oh,
like that.
Mark D. Parker.
Yeah. And he was like, this is a travesty because as soon as someone gets up on the stage, they were saying
Yeah,
that people at Asbury, they were saying that as soon as someone gets up on the stage and does any programming, then the spirit has left the building, right?
yeah,
And I was like, that feels a lot like our church. It's like it's almost like it's there's an irony there because our church is like you don't want to manufacture worship, but we do things to help lead correctly. It almost feels I can't reconcile that seeming contradiction. Um, so there's that. The second thing is at our church, huge children's ministry, massive children's ministry, and we will I for the foreseeable future, I don't think we will ever integrate any sort of liturgy at our church because we have a ton of Catholics that come to our church because they don't, by their own testimony, they don't know Jesus, right? They don't know why the heck they would go to church. And maybe they're Catholic. They want to bring up their children in a place where there's a real, in their words, a real relationship with transcendence, right? And so they come to our children's ministry or they put their children in our children's ministry and then they start coming, right? Because they're like, oh, wait, there is something here besides. I've had people tell me that they didn't know Mary was a human. Does that make sense? Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah. And so,
Again, because people just get the vibe. And
yes.
if you're around Catholics, you can get the vibe that
Yeah.
Jesus and Mary aren't human, but they probably
Right.
were really explicit about Jesus,
Right.
in terms
Not
of the
as much.
creed,
Right.
but Mary isn't in the creed.
Right. Right. Yeah. And she so, oh yeah, there was another thing. My dad a couple weeks back, he's preaching his sermon and he says something to the effect of you're not a sinner, you are a saint you have been turned into a saint. And then afterwards he was like, "Oh, I shouldn't have said saint because all of the
All the
Catholics at our church,
Catholics.
yeah, they don't know what I'm talking about, right?"
Right.
And so we have this crazy children's ministry, and this is just I don't know how this contributes to the conversation overall, but this is sort of an aside. When the pitch was being given for the fundraising for our massive children's complex, huge, multiple rooms. When I was coming up in the church, we were in portables. You know what I mean? We were in these
Yep.
portable buildings, but now it's like we have playhouse and all these, like slides and all these things for all these kids. When the children's pastor minister, he gave his pitch. The campaign was called "Say Yes to the Next Generation," and he preaches on Sunday to give. We're going to do this big giving campaign and he walks off the stage and dies backstage. Yes, he falls down the stairs and dies backstage. And I don't really know what to do with that, and I don't know how that contributes at all. But it's the children's ministry is so fundamental, even more so at our church,
Yeah.
because at the heart of that campaign is a loss
Yeah. It's a sacrifice.
and
There's a sacrifice.
a
Yeah.
sa
It's
I
very
just don't even know.
Pageauian.
When Pajot says symbolism happens, and that morning, this is just I don't say this often. This is the first time I've ever said it to someone who wasn't in my inner circle or something like that. That morning, I was in high school, and before my mom came in my room to wake me up and tell me that something happened, and Pastor Eddie I don't know if she said he had died yet, because I don't know if it was certain or not.
Yeah.
I was dreaming that he was in trouble
Hmm.
that morning.
Wow. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
the man that baptized me. And
Yeah.
I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
So when Pajot says symbolism happens, I can't make sense. And then there's the
Yeah.
Pentecostal side of things where,
Yeah.
like I
I'm
just
not
don't know.
surprised. I'm
I
not
just don't know what it
surprised.
means, you know what I mean? And I don't know what to make of it.
The House of Wu would definitely welcome that story.
Yeah, yeah, they would. I've told it a few times to fa friends and family members, and I always so that whole day, we canceled all the services. We had this big prayer. Everyone met at the family's house, and then he had four boys. Yeah, I think four boys. One of them was in the midst of being adopted.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
man.
yeah. And so we all
Wow.
met at the house, had a giant prayer event that night, where we pulled all the chairs out of the entire big complex room and just gathered around in prayer circles,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that speaks to, again, hopefully I'm not getting too off track of the main point that we were trying to talk about, but that speaks to another one of those things of like, I can't see myself. This was another point and another question I wanted to ask you is what does conservative mean? What does traditional mean? Because would it be traditional for me to leave my upbringing and go carve out for myself a new identity at some other church that is radically different from, like, isn't that anti-tradition for my like upbringing?
Yeah. That's
Like,
why I tell people, because people are
yeah,
like, when are you going to become Catholic? When are you going to become Orthodox? I say,
yeah.
if I would go to Catholicism or Orthodoxy, that would be a very Protestant thing for me to do.
Absolutely. That's my thought is like again, stylistically speaking, I have a very Peugeot sense of I love symbolism, I love artistic qualities, and I probably would value a little bit more liturgy. Um, but I can't leave what I have been given to be present in. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
I hear I've listened to quite a bit of Richard Rollin or even Jonathan Pageau, and I know they both come from like Baptist backgrounds too.
Yeah. Yep.
And to each their own, everyone has their own story.
Yep.
But it's like for me to call myself out and forge a new identity for myself, that feels going back to the is Orthodox liberal thing, that feels liberal to me.
Yeah.
That feels like, okay, my church is a mile from my house. My dad is the senior pastor. I grew up there. The senior pastor who baptized, or excuse me, the children's pastor who baptized me died there. Like I have a life there. And for the sake of tradition, I'm just going to, like a tradition, you see what I'm saying? Like I'm just
I
going
know
to
exactly what you're saying.
sever that
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
It feels almost like, for me, it feels like the same sort of thing people who deconstruct or people who abandon, like people who want to forge a new identity for themselves, it's the same kind of thing that they do. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
That's away from the church. It
Yep.
would be the same kind of thing for me.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
No, I agree because to
yeah.
be so we could use, I don't know if you're around for the um sincerity, authenticity,
Hmm.
profilicity
Yeah.
videos.
Yep.
It would very much be the culture of authenticity to move into a tradition.
Absolutely.
But tradition
Yeah.
is sincerity. And so
Absolutely.
you get these weird inversions in our world. And again, I'm not trying to in any way criticize Jonathan Peugeot or Richard Rowland or anyone for
Neither am
doing
I.
that.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to set up some cheap shot on them, but it's for me, sort of the metagelical spirit in me. I think you need to I think you need to go in the direction that's going to bring you closer to Jesus.
Right.
And again, that's a very Protestant way of looking at it, but I
Yeah.
kind of can't help myself because that's how I am and how I've been formed and who I've been called to be. But at the same, I just earlier this week, it's still in the No Wait No Ads. I had a conversation with Nick, who I had met online. I had a conversation with him in 2018 and then 2020 and then
Mm.
one now. And he's driving like 4.5 hours every week to go to a little Orthodox church
Right.
in Santa Rosa, California. And I just think, praise God, I'm super happy because it's clear that he's growing and he's thriving in that Orthodox setting. And I'd say you just keep going to that Orthodox church. And I know full well that I'm sure there's some people out there that hear that coming from a Reformed pastor and are like, you shouldn't be encouraging those Orthodox. You know how
Right.
they are? And it's like, not really, but I'm getting to know them. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I don't see many of the Orthodox people that I've met. I mean, Jonathan Peugeot, Richard Rowland, Martin Shaw, Paul
Yep.
Kingsnorth. I'm just mentioning the high status ones. Never mind all the
Yeah.
TLCers who have gone there. And from what I can see, the Orthodox Church is helping these Christians be more fruitful Christians in
Right.
terms of all the aspects that I care about when I look at people. Are they more faithful? Are they more loving? Are they more sacrificial? Are they more giving? Is the fruit of the Spirit,
Absolutely.
flourishing in them because of the ministry that this church is doing around them? And the answer is yes. And so I say, praise God, keep it up. Now, does that mean all of these people are going to stay Orthodox, or that the Orthodox Church in America, the Orthodox churches in America, because there's plenty of them and lots of different kinds,
Hmm.
that they're all going to be on a particular trajectory? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I think this huge influx. So the Orthodox Church in America is undergoing something strange. On one hand, the immigrant communities, um, though the Orthodox Church as all that's a huge percentage of the Orthodox Church in the United States and North America. So they're shrinking because just like you described with those Catholics, there's sort of so if the evangelical revivalists are sort of kairos, the
Mm.
liturgical are sort of chronos.
Mm.
And what I've seen is that there's an intergenerational movement between kairos and chronos often, and then
Mm.
people that are sort of unimpressed by Christian nominalism in a chronos style sometimes find new fruit when they go to Kairos.
Hmm.
And then, as we've seen in the emerging church, and as we've seen in the Peterson Peugeot pipeline, people who grew up in the Kairos church are finding fruitfulness in the Chronos
Yeah.
liturgy. So, and I
Yeah.
say, well, I
Wouldn't
don't see a
would it
problem with
be
this.
would it be though? I want to make sure my understanding of Cronus and Kairos is correct and in line with what you're saying. But would it be, this is just a devil's advocate thing, at least as far as how the direction of our conversation. Um, Kairos is the, at least for the Catholics, that would be the Eucharist.
Yeah, yeah.
So they are having a Kairos
Yes.
moment, but the problem is the laity doesn't understand essentially, right? Like they don't, or at least they're not feeling it. You know what I mean? Like
Right. Well, and
it,
it's, those
it's not
even
Kairos for
those
them, you
even
know?
that mapping of Cryos and Chronos is certainly imperfect,
Yeah.
but the ideal behind, let's say, we even have this in Protestant right now with John Mark Comerism, let's say.
Yeah.
All the
Right.
spiritual discipline. I mean, he's now being able to sort of popularize a lot of what Dallas Willard and Richard Foster did.
Hmm.
Of course, Dallas Willard coming out of the Southern Baptists.
Hmm.
Richard Foster, I think it was Quaker. Um,
I don't know. I haven't read it. My wife has, though. I haven't read
yeah.
The Celebration of Discipline, but yeah.
So so you have every church is going to have of Kairos and Chronos in terms of built
Yeah.
into it.
Right.
But when I look at the Orthodox and the liturgy, you hear them talk. It isn't that necessarily, although some have this. It's the cumulative impact of doing the liturgy every week that's going to deliver
Yeah.
the bounty and the blessing.
Yeah.
And that's true. And that's also true in Protestant churches.
Yeah.
Because it's the cumulative impact of the Christian formation. So both are true in both churches. And you're right.
Yeah.
In the Catholic Church, the Eucharist is sort of
Yeah.
the astounding moment.
Right.
And yeah, hey, fair enough. I'm not trying to.
Whereas in I mean, I'm a Baptist. I'm ours is baptism.
Yep.
So, and that
Yes.
goes to the revivalism thing. So
Yes.
we have a built-in Jewish mikvah. Like we have like a step down in pool with like plants all around. Like that's built into our church. And here's something funny about our church. The There was a video that you published about a gentleman talking about what it meant to bring um, sort of a day in, day out, the Chronos, even exterior life stuff like Mary, Barry, and you know what I mean? Like the idea that like we need to bring our graveyards back to the church, essentially. There was something that said that, some video that you published. And we are doing that to a certain extent, except it's not graveyards. It's the opposite. We're doing, and a lot of churches, we're like the third or fourth church to do this in our town, is we have built a coffee shop on the church grounds, like
Yep.
its own building.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it like not into somewhere. It's its
Right.
own massive build. It's part of
And
an
it's not just
entire.
Sunday morning, it's open 7 days a
It's
week.
every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's called the Come and See campaign. Come and see the man who told me everything I ever did, right? And it's like just maybe 20 feet, the entryway of that coffee shop is 20 feet from our baptism pool that now we have built an amphitheater around. So it's like how much giving has gone into this spirit of like millions of dollars have gone into funding this spirit of bring in the masses and get them in the baptism pool. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yes. Well,
Like here,
and
let me tell you about Jesus. Let's sit over a cup of coffee, tell you about Jesus. Oh, there's the baptism pool, you know? And so, and it's all sort of like subliminal, but also completely transparent, you know? So it's
what's
anyway.
the stand in the way of me being baptized? The
Exactly.
Ethiopian eunuch. And
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Richard Rowland makes a point, which I think is a very good and right and fair point, which is that Protestants have their saints, they have their hagiographies, they have
Hmm.
their icons. To a certain degree, it's not, we shouldn't be surprised that even American revivalist churches that were sort of deracinated from the sending churches back in Europe when they, the in terms of the American move west, the settlers outpaced the institutions, and so that's where you get your Bible. I mean, all the stuff that Mark Knoll writes about. It's shouldn't be a surprise that we wind up sort of reconstituting some of these archetypes
Hmm.
that are just, centuries and centuries old in
Yeah.
Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but something adapted to our time and culture and technology and all of those things. So
Yeah.
it's to me, it makes sense. It
Mm,
makes sense,
mm,
and that God is. I mean, one of the things that you realize very quickly is that it's easy in this country to sort of live in your own mental fishbowl
hmm.
and not realize just how massive things are and how many people there are out there and how many different temperaments and personalities and stories and traditions. And I think to me, it makes a lot of sense that God uses all sorts of things and traditions, et cetera, to no, again, I'm a Calvinist, so to call his people in.
Mm,
Um,
hmm.
that just makes good sense to me. And
Yeah.
so
I think
I
Redeemed Zoomer puts it that we are all what states in the we're all United States in the country of the kingdom or something like that. I don't
there
know.
you go.
Yeah.
And so I, you know, the I in fact just on CRC Voices today, someone said something I think a little ungenerous about the mega churches, and I said they are a really important part of the ecosystem in American Christianity today. They are a super important part, and
Mm,
they do a lot of heavy lifting, and so there's something to be learned from them. But just like, so someone might think that, oh, Little Living Stones is idyllic. Trust me, it's far from idyllic. There's a ton of stuff that this church gets wrong and that I get wrong and that I'm a bad pastor for and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just the way it is
mm.
in the church that but the mega church, it's a different animal, but I sure am thankful to God that they're there fulfilling that part of the ecosystem.
Yeah. I I guess I find like not that I mean this explicitly, but with all the conversation that I hear in the estuary meetings that go online or things like that, I always wonder like, am I dipping my toes into, am I di like, I keep going back to it. Is there genuine separation here between megachurch land, like my megachurch? Again, I do find that we are probably more like how things normally are in megachurches than sort of the internet makes it seem, what megachurches are like. But is there, what is the genuine difference and what is the connection? And there's so much conversation around the Orthodox and Catholic and tradition and things like that within the TLC, and I'm always listening to it. And it's like, is am I just sort of like looking at that group and what they're doing, or am I participating in it in any way? And
Yeah.
what would that look like for me to participate? How do I connect? How do I draw that connection? Um, and this is also connected to something else that I wanted to ask you is what is the place, so we can go any which way, but what is the place, or does estuary have a place, and what would it look like for estuary to be at um, a mega church?
I think well, John Vidonk's church is a mega church. Well, they're a little
Okay.
small now. They're not. They were up over 1,000 for a while. I think they're more 600, 700, but
Okay.
they're functionally like a mega church.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
so it doesn't surprise me that Estuary was in many ways birthed out of a mega church
Right.
because it really is sort of a seeker.
That's what
It
I
is really
thought.
a
Yeah.
seeker small group movement in a lot of
I
ways.
I pitched it to my dad and he was like, "This sounds exactly like what we're about," you know? So I was
Yeah,
like,
it
yeah.
is. And even though it's sometimes a little hard to talk some pastors into it, because
Right.
what it doesn't have is what a lot of evangelicals want it to have, which is a clear presentation of the gospel, okay?
Right.
And it doesn't have that. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have that by design. And you might go, that's a terrible thing that a pastor would engineer this and it not have
Mm.
that. It's like, well, I have my reasons.
Hmm.
So I think it goes very well in a mega church, and I think it would frankly do very well. I think in terms of the TLC is a young thing.
Mm.
Now, just saying that sort of puts me on record as saying I mean it's lived for when did the TLC start with my first Randos conversations, maybe?
Mm.
So it's maybe 6 or 7 years old. So it's gotten out of toddlerhood. Now it's sort of like a first grader. But one of the things that has been good about this is that it grows when someone decides to sort of step up and add a ship to the flotilla.
Mm.
And I was really glad so Mark Parker, the guy with the mustache,
Yeah.
Mark Parker used to he first found me and then he would leave a lot of disapproving comments early on and then he would get frustrated with me and then he would send me some things on Twitter because he basically was sort of reading it through a political lens and he thought that I was sort of right wing, which
Mm.
is kind of funny because I'm not.
Ironic. Yeah.
And but then he got it and then he's like, "Oh, well, this isn't about politics, and this isn't the Alpha Course. This isn't any of that. This is a space where a really diverse group of people can come together, and it's hospitable to sometimes some pretty wild conversation. And so
Right.
what Mark did was basically launched a ship in the flotilla, which
Mm.
is his channel, and then the House of Woo, became a fixture and an
Mm.
installation. And now every Tuesday he has the House of Woo and he has, 20 to 30 people at a given time watching it.
Mhm.
And it's not a big channel,
Right.
but it's big enough that there's probably a couple hundred people that are subscribed to his channel, and when he starts live streaming, they'll jump in. And so, partly because we are so I am such an odd fish in that I have always been in liminal spaces. So Northside Chapel was CRC, but it was also racial reconciliation and a little bit
Mm.
evangelical. And
Mm.
then Madison Square was more evangelical, somewhat charismatic, still CRC. And then I did foreign missions. So that was even more
Mhm.
evangelical. And then I get back and I sort of learn all this seeker methodology. And so then I learn the seeker stuff. But part of the racial reconciliation stuff that I had grown up with sort of leaned me towards the emerging group people. And then I had some interaction with Rachel Held Evans and some of those early emerging people. And then went whole hog sort of into Tim Keller for a while. So I've got some young, restless, and reformed in
Right.
me. And now I've got this. And so I've sort of been Forrest Gumping my way through a
Yeah.
CRC version of evangelicalism for the last 30 years.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
okay, 40 years. 40 plus years. So,
Mm.
and so in that way, when these things come around, I've been a lot of places and I've done a lot of things. And so, and because I have to keep myself together and coherent, I try to pull the things together.
Hmm.
And so a number of people have over the years said, Paul, what happens when the evangelicals really find our space? Will that be trouble? And it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know, but I'm glad that at least we've got enough body size. I think the TLC has enough body size now that we can actually bring in more different people
Yeah.
to sort of become part of this flotilla. Because,
Yeah.
you look at Grail Country and you look at
You have to
Jacob.
tell me. I know what some of them are. I don't
Okay.
know what Grail Crunch Country is.
So Grail Country is Nate Heil and Sherry Sutter. So Nate Heil is this Christian anarchist who
Okay.
worships with Anglicans,
Okay.
and he's not exactly universalist,
Okay.
but and he likes reading Russian theologians.
Okay.
I mean, and then we have the oddest,
Yeah.
strangest people in this flotilla. We
Right.
really do. And
Yeah.
you've got a Grim Grizz and a Chad. I mean, and then a biblical
Right.
Unitarian.
Right.
So,
That's Sam, right?
and so
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we weren't sort of discovered and there wasn't sort of a proportional big influx of really strong evangelical
It's
seeker
been
types
organic. Yeah.
because there's a lot of them out there.
Right.
And I've always been happy that I think we've grown sort of organically, which has sort of helped keep stable. And one of the things that I learned in that one church that I went to that went from a small church to a mega church within like 3 years, when that happens, just by you have to adjust and accommodate,
Right.
and you lose something of what you had when you were tiny.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. What would
I
it look
wouldn't,
like for the evangelicals to find the TLC? Like what does that mean?
I don't
First of all, what does
know.
evangelical mean in that context? Does that is
Yeah.
Christianity Today publishes a magazine article or like what is the about look at this organic online growing community or like what would that look like?
Yeah, it could be that there's really no foundation for the anxiety because I'll say it this way, and I know some people will be offended. Most normies have the experience that you have when you tried to share videos and people look at it like,
Hmm.
well, why would I watch that?
Yeah.
I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of the TLC is frankly unwatchable. And it's not just Grim Grizz and it's not just the Freddie and Paul show. A lot of it is
Right.
unwatchable,
Yeah.
which is in many ways a
Yeah.
protection for us.
Yeah. Certainly. It's calculated like but not really, but it sort of works, you know?
Yeah,
As a
there's
media guy, as a media producer who like my goal is like how do you make optimize your content in such a way that that brings as many people into the fold as possible. It has been a training in learning the opposite almost, but with intention, if that makes sense. So especially your videos, like the titles, my wife, I'll show. Here's this is just weird. I say I'm listening to my daily Paul Vanderklay. I'll tell my wife, and then I'll show her the video title, and she'll just be like, "What is that?" You know, like what's going on here? And it's pretty funny. No, it's good. Have you hovered around like 30K subscribers for
for a
how
while
long?
now. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
There
think you
was
were
a
at 30 when I
yeah,
subscribed,
yeah.
but yeah.
There was a couple of months ago. I was getting so like for most of the first 5 years, I was getting somewhere between 100 and 200 new subscribers in 28 days. And a couple of months ago, it almost got down to zero. So
Mm,
it really sort of, and I saw that and I thought, well, maybe, that's all
yeah,
right. That's all right. I don't necessarily mind that because again, there's warring parts of me.
yeah,
Sure, there are parts of me who would love to,
yeah,
hockey stick this thing, but another
sure.
part of me is like, that is the last thing that should happen. That would be horrible for me. It was hard enough when the channel started because it did start fast,
Mm,
and I was, hey, I've got, it was like I've got a life. I don't want this thing
yeah,
disrupting my life.
right.
And, it was an adjustment for my wife and it was an adjustment for my church. And, fortunately, we all sort of made it through and it's okay.
Yeah.
But, um,
Would you say that's a like you have talked about Jordan Peterson's change? Like it's almost like a miniature version of that, like how his fame changed his life a little bit, or
oh, well, I was spared that. I mean,
right, right.
I wouldn't wish that on someone what Jordan Peterson went through.
Yeah,
It's just not good.
yeah, right.
And, I look at what we do to, young basketball stars and, sports stars. And I mean, people desire for that to happen. And I can understand why you're going to get wealthy and you're going to have access and those things. But what Jordan Peterson went through, what his fame has cost him, I think it's a horrendous price to pay.
Yeah.
So I love, I love the corner.
Hmm.
I think it's awesome. I I'm glad that some of our channels and my video titles, and I'm glad that a lot of it's unwatchable
Mm.
because it sort of makes a filter and it
Yeah.
means that we can, like I described earlier, in a mega church, there's often again a little core,
Hmm.
is that we can have a little core here, but it's not just so this week somebody he'll probably listen to this, somebody was coming down to this area for he was going to take some vacation and so then he wanted to see me and then stuff happened, but um I I love it that newcomers come in ones and twos to our estuary meeting on Sunday morning. That's really exciting for the
Mm.
members of my church
Mm.
because the people who come in are interesting people.
Right,
They have unusual stories often.
right.
And it's cool. So I'd much rather have that than I mean, if Jordan Peterson tried to do what I did, do what I do, well, he simply couldn't do it.
Right. I wonder if he would be happier if he was doing it though, if he was
I
doing what you do.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I That would depend on a deeper level of knowing him than I have.
Yeah, of course. I'm only going off of my impression, which is the Jubilee angry,
Yeah.
very when you had that interview with the gentleman who was there, and he explained how there was just an immense confusion on Jordan Peterson's part as to what he was actually doing. It made me feel really sad for Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Jubilee as a platform is not like I feel like he is the polar opposite as you get like his lectures and like him being a professor, the combative like circle, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
of him
Yeah.
having to defend like a sequence of propositions that he was making where people are just like calling him out for I don't know. It felt like yeah, I think you said or someone said that it just feels a little bit like elder abuse. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
emotional elder abuse. And
Yeah.
I was just like, and I have been skeptical of the Daily Wire thing. I just wonder, like, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. You follow him closer than I do,
Well,
but
there are analogies between this and the scale that mega churches have to
yeah.
operate on.
Hmm.
I mean, the budget for a mega church has to be considerable. I mean,
Hmm.
there are mega churches that have bigger budgets the Christian Reformed denomination, about 230,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
I am sure that there are mega churches that have larger budgets than the Christian Reformed Church,
Mm-hmm.
because of what they're doing. And when you have that scale, when you have that industrialization, when they plan a big public works project, like when they plan to build the Golden Gate Bridge, engineers at the beginning basically would say, this bridge is going to cost like 40 lives of construction workers, and we have to build that into the cost.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think about that or say that,
Mm.
but you could look at something like the Daily Wire or a megachurch and say, there's going to be externalities to this kind of operation that are going to be negative. But, and you could say, well, okay, well, let's say the work of Jesus Christ is going to cost him his life. There it
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah.
Um, in this age, you always have these kinds of things, which I think
Yeah.
is actually part of the gospel and part of why there's a new heaven and a new earth, because in this earth, that's part of this package.
Yeah. What is it? The age of decay.
Yep.
Or yeah. Yeah. Speaking of budgets for megachurches, um, ours being a megachurch, we have budget issues because COVID. My dad became senior pastor like end of 2019, I think. Yeah, is when the transition happened. Um,
Lovely.
our church actually he told me the other day we replanted our church in COVID.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we've stayed at mega church,
Yeah.
and I think our attendance is higher than it's ever been, but like the outflow and inflow in the last 5 years,
Yeah.
along with a completely different giving demographic, has been we are more racially diverse and more in need of funds at the same time. And there's a correlation in our, city with
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Um, and but we get to have, my dad also said, we get to have the experience of not having endless resources at our disposal, which allows us to rely on God. It gives us opportunities um, for the wandering in the wilderness manifestation.
Yep.
Um, and I think that's really special. And I think that that is one of even with our massive building project that I just mentioned, he said it's like a miracle that we have been able to achieve that, because that's millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it is one of those things where who knows how we did it, how we managed to do it. Um, and that is almost for Jordan Peterson, I wonder if what could get him out of the slump that we all think he's in, we don't
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
is some wilderness time. Um, Maybe not emotionally. I know he went through his health issues, but I mean even more just resourcefulness. If he had to get a little bit more scrappy and it wasn't just like, well, I'm just going to do this, this, and this, and this. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and engage on the ground a little bit more. But can he ever go back?
Yeah.
I don't know if he could ever go back, you
That's
know?
just it. He would have to get it could happen. Again, it could happen if he becomes a has-been.
Right.
Because has-beens, I mean, fame is a fickle creature. And if you become publicly unfamous and sort of um you know, there are plenty of Hollywood stars that, and I live in Sacramento, I don't live in LA, but there are plenty of Hollywood stars that if you met them and they're sufficiently unfamous for a while and they never really got to the true nosebleed. I mean, they're
Right.
not Elvis,
Right.
um, but there are plenty of Hollywood stars that could get unfamous enough to just once again be a normal person.
Yeah.
But the things that I think really helped Jordan hit that spot when he did between 2016 and 2019 was the many hours he would spend as a clinic and as a clinician.
Right.
The many hours he would spend in the classroom and with graduate students in seminars. That's what, if he could return to that. But he's also in some ways sort of structured his life to not go back there.
Hmm.
You've got Peterson Academy
Right.
and you've got ARC. And so he has sort of launched off into new endeavors, which fair enough. These are things that he cared about. He wanted to remake the university, and Peterson Academy is an attempt at that. He wants to revive Western culture. ARC is an attempt at that. So he's sort of, and he's not getting any younger. And I don't know how his health is. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think it would behoove him to sit down with people that he knows and that know him really well and say, think about your life a little bit.
Mm,
He's a year older than I am, so he's turned 63
mm,
in 2025
mm.
and say, okay, well, you're 63 and your health is such and such. You're a planner. He's definitely a guy who believes in planning.
Right.
Um, how long are you going to work? What do you want to
Yeah.
do? And
Yeah.
what's it going to take to achieve it? Now,
Yeah.
maybe that's what he's doing right now, and maybe Jubilee was a misstep, or maybe it isn't. We really don't know.
What would it look like for Jordan Peterson to take his own self-authoring program?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And maybe he has, and maybe he and Michaela are working on a plan. But to a number of us, Daily Wire, he's sung their praises because I think Daily Wire made life a lot easier for him
Hmm.
because then suddenly he didn't have to worry about the content management. And you know better than I do, managing that stuff is not
Mm,
nothing
mm-mm. No.
because the thumbnailing,
Yeah.
the not just the titling, the just
Yeah.
managing and he was, I think, quite reasonably concerned that YouTube could just, pull the rug out from under him.
Right.
Yeah, I believe it could. It did halfway to Brett Weinstein.
Mm,
So what should you do? Well, he decided to go to Daily Wire, and he seems to like Ben Shapiro, and he seems to like a bunch of the guys there. So fair enough. So hey,
yeah.
it's his life. He gets
Right.
to he gets to do what
Of
he
course.
wants.
Yeah, we're just
We're just
backseat driving, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I see what Jordan Peterson, I had this thought the other day. I see what Jordan Peterson has done is start the TLC, but I know you started it. But you know what I mean? Like his bomb that he dropped
yeah,
on the world,
yeah,
really what matters is the on the ground influence. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And he I think he passed on to you and maybe other people like a torch, like a spiritual torch, you know what I mean, that continues to be passed, you know what I
yep,
mean?
yep,
And that is that spirit of how are we, this goes into the evangelical seeker vibe that I was brought up in and I have to operate in because it's my filter, but how do we reintroduce people to what it means to not see the world so clinically and so cold and so robotic and so like it's like all that matters is the heat death of the universe. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But like
yeah,
he brought people, he woke people up. And I think I emailed in my email to you, I shared with you that I had a YouTube channel that I was doing movie like analysis videos for years ago. I got like up to like 30K subscribers and then I got burnt out and I didn't do anything with it. And now I started posting these unsolicited Bible teachings that I do on Sunday mornings. And I got these comments that were like new atheist comments in the, and I felt like I had like I had gone back in time or something.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah,
I was like, this is just an old conversation. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like this
yeah,
is, I don't know. It just felt like and then we're commenting about cosmology, and I'm talking about phenomenology and the dome, and, or like I'm talking about like ancient Middle Eastern like ways of viewing the world, and Pajot talks about the cosmic mountain and all these things. And then he told me that I was asserting a fairy tale, like I was talking about fairy tales, um, and that it was absurd and you shouldn't teach this to your child and things like that. And then I responded with, these things chronologically proceed scientific assumptions. And then he was like, and so I was like, it's not wrong of me to acknowledge how ancient people viewed the world, right? And then he said, I suggest you check out Matt Dillahunty's debates. And I was like, and I was like, yeah, I don't even know how to respond to that. Like, what does that have to do with anything? And I just sort of left it at that because I was just like, I didn't really know how to respond to that because I was like, this is such an old conversation. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
like Jordan Peterson didn't catch many people in his net, and I know that's true because that conversation is still happening. Um, but he did do something, and now all those people who had those views of the world that like science and materialism, it's all that matters, like they are now having actual engaging conversations about what it means for I did a teaching on paganism and gods and spirits and things like that, and I drew upon TLC conversation talking points, or at least I thought I was doing it, but I was trying to do that a little bit to because there's a lot of conversation about what is spirit that goes on in the TLC. I know Sam Tiedemann, is that his name?
yep, yep.
He did those talks about it, and I listened to them, and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So I brought some of that in. Again, I thought I was. And so I see Jordan Peterson really what he did is the TLC,
Yeah.
or again, I know it's actually you're the actual person that got it going, you and everyone else that has engaged in it. But right, it's like he inspired you to do
Yeah,
videos,
oh,
and then
absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
He sort of did the fracking, and now the
yeah,
oil is flowing. So no, he
exactly,
really did. He broke open the space, and
yeah,
he did. He changed the world. He did to a
yeah.
significant degree, and we are all downstream of him. So as Mark Lefebvre says, we're part of the Peterson sphere.
Peterson sphere, yeah.
Even though I don't know if someone would say the TLC if Jordan Peterson would have any idea what they're talking about. So, which is fair
That's
enough. He
true. And I
knows.
mean, he's
He,
not a believer. He's not you know what I mean? So
yeah,
even on the side of it is funny how the Christians co-opt Jordan Peterson when it's convenient. Um, you know what I mean? That
yeah,
it's like he's on our side. See, he's on our side. And then
yeah.
he goes on and says, I'm not a Christian, and then gets mad at those people that are calling him Christians, you know what I mean? On Jubilee.
Maybe
Uh,
I'm not a Christian. That's
yeah,
a
maybe. He's like, I'm
that's
not
a
going to tell
that's
you.
a card I keep right here, and
Isn't it
I'm
funny?
not showing
Yeah.
you.
I don't know what you would say to this, but like I have arguments with friends that like the fact that he does not confess Christ, that just tells you that he's not a Christian, is what they will say. You know what I mean? The fact that he like, and gets down to what is a Christian, um, and they would say the fact that he does not claim it as his identity, that should just be your evidence. And I struggle with that a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a fair point. It's a fair
yeah,
point.
yeah.
To me, it's more. It says more that he has not joined a church.
Mm,
You know, his wife
hmm
joined the Roman Catholic Church. I believe his daughter, I don't know if she was, I don't know if his daughter was ever baptized or not.
mm.
Um,
And is she at a non-denominational church, or is she also Catholic?
no, no, evangelical. I think
Okay.
she's been in more evangelical spaces.
Mm,
So, but I don't actually know what she has or hasn't done, but
mm,
she sort of identifies Christian-ish a lot of times
hmm
on some of these videos. So,
mm,
but on one hand, fame has cost these people enough. There's a good argument to say, well, why don't you just leave them be? But
mm, hmm
part of this for Peterson is a piece of Peterson is an interesting mix of modernity and post-modernity and some other stuff. And that part of the structure of modernity is that religious faith is a private affair.
Hmm.
It's not, it
That's
doesn't
true.
belong in the public sphere.
Yeah.
And so when he prefers to not identify publicly, but I think the clearest thing he said was to this one Roman Catholic on a Roman Catholic show who was like, oh, Jordan, why don't you follow your wife? And he basically says, I'm not a joiner.
Yeah.
I stay outside of things. And I think that is the clearest thing that he says about it,
Yeah.
that he sort of stands apart.
Yeah.
And okay, that's what he's telling us.
Yeah.
Now, to judge his heart, that's God's business. So, and that's always God's business.
Right. I
So,
I believe that. There's this, I don't know if you followed the conversation between Gavin Ortland and Redeemed Zoomer on evangelicalism and mainline churches. It's a thing that has gone off, this
yeah, I know.
debate.
I haven't watched it yet.
Okay.
I've seen little bits of it, and I
Yeah.
get I get bored with it to a degree because
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
find anything in it that sort of grabbed me.
Right. The only thing about it that I just find is really funny is, and I might be misrepresenting Zoomer here, which I don't listen to him very much, but he says essentially that he's the opposite of Peterson in that sense. He's like, the main point is that you're in
Hmm.
a mainline church. Like that is the command of Christ, is to be part of the system that is the ordained system.
Yeah.
And then
In that sense, in
I
that
asked
sense,
why he is not Catholic or Orthodox then. And he's making
because
that
he's
from argument from a
American.
Protestant. Yeah, yeah, because he's American. Yeah. I'm like, isn't that exactly what they're arguing? Like, isn't that their point? Is you have to be in the institution or else you're in sin, you know? And so I think Peterson and Zoomer on a Protestant side are like the extreme opposites in that sense. Is Peterson is very, as gospel simplicity, that gentleman said, like he's theologically liberal, politically conservative, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Which makes him wonky and weird, like what box he fits into. But it
Yep.
is true because he is like hyper theologically liberal in that what matters is his personal private relationship,
Yep.
and that's like the goal, you know what I
Yep.
mean? And not him being part of any body, you know?
Peterson has also said very clearly, I am an existentialist Christian.
Mm,
And if you understand existentialism, that also does not put him in a church.
mm,
But I think that is a tremendous, I think Peterson himself is very clear on this for himself. And I think he has actually been very clear on this. It's just that generally speaking, with Jordan Peterson, he has his categories and his definitions,
mm.
and he's not backing down from
He's
them.
going to stick. That was part of the Jubilee thing, is like
That's exactly the
people
Jubilee thing.
came up and they're like, how are we to engage with you in any conversation if you are making up your own definitions?
Right.
Um, it
And
all,
he'll say, okay,
yeah, right, right.
I am
Well, and
not
he'll
backing
say
down from
things.
my definitions.
Right. Glenn Scrivener in his video analysis said like Peterson gives a definition of God that he says is in the Bible that is not like in the Bible, like that Elijah says or something. He's like,
Right.
this does not
That is
appear.
not a good reading of Elijah.
Right.
But in all fairness, again, to Peterson, Peterson has in fact constructed through his all of his biblical series sort of a definition of God,
Mm, hmm.
which again is his own.
Yeah.
And he's not going to back down from it. I mean, this is the thing that I remember a long time ago, I was talking to Ron Dart about Jordan Peterson, and we were talking about Erasmus and Luther.
Mm,
And Dart wanted to see Peterson as an Erasmus figure, which I could very much understand. And he fits that in many ways. But I said temperamentally, he's Luther.
mm.
If you back him into a corner, he's just gonna fight you until he dies.
Here
I
I
mean, when
stand, I
he
can do no other.
exactly.
Yeah.
And he's got his own definitions. He's got his own matrix. It's got his own framework. He continues to like to explore it and retouch it and refine it. but it's like that piece of art that's on his thing with that he plays with the Mozart song. That's his thing. And
Yeah.
he's like an ultra nerd that keeps tuning his little definitions. And these people come in and they're like, well, why don't you talk to me with a shared language? Up yours, you
Yeah.
wokest. I mean,
Yeah.
no, I've got my thing. This
And
is
what do you
my
think about
thing.
like what do you think about that? Like that's extremely for me, that's extremely isolationist. It like for me, it's like if I am controlling the terms of the definitions, like then yeah, I'm making myself the master of the conversation and essentially the master of knowledge. And that's a I like Jordan Peterson, and I'm not trying to be cynical here, but I'm trying to like identify what is the weakness in that, if that makes sense.
Well, the weakness is, I forget who said it, one of the people post stream of Jubilee, that it's really going to hinder your capacity to communicate clearly what it is you want to say.
Hmm.
To a degree, John Vervaeke has done a similar
Mm,
thing,
mm.
but John Vervaeke has decided to tweak all his words so that when he uses a word, it's going to be obviously different than the word we're commonly, we're going to have dialogos here. It's
Yeah,
not going to be a
absolutely.
dialogue. Now, Vervaeke's been criticized for that, but in fairness, Vervaeke has avoided what Peterson keeps running into in terms of Peterson is using public words for a private map.
Hmm.
Vervaeke is taking words and altering them so that he can signal to people that this is a
Right.
private map, and if you listen to me long enough, I'll explain it to you. The
Yeah.
downside for John Vervaeke is a lot of people listen to him and are like, I can't gain purchase on what he's saying.
Mm.
For Peterson, because he's using the public words, people are going to pick up vibes, they're going to misinterpret, they're going
Yep.
to do all kinds of things. And just like with the woman that used to listen because she's passed now, listen to Joel Osteen and then listen to me, she's like, I hear the same thing. When people
Hmm.
listen to Peterson, they're going to make those connections. They
Yeah.
might not be Jordan's points, but it might be a point that's actually helpful for them. And
Right.
so, in terms of a marketing strategy or a fame strategy, Jordan's approach works better than John's,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
but
true. Yeah.
it opens him up to exactly what we saw in the Jubilee
Right.
video.
Yeah. 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 The Vervaeke, well, and language is changing in real time because of these things.
Yeah.
And I found myself using the terms eminence and emergence in one of my teachings, and then I Googled it afterwards, and I was like, wait, this is not in Merriam-Webster's, and I didn't realize that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, yeah, because what we're doing in the TLC for the most part is we're playing this enormous language game that is in some ways more Vervaekian.
Yeah, right,
Because, I
exactly.
mean, if you look at what I do, we've got God number one and God number two,
Yeah, and I thought
hierarchies
about
by
bringing that in, like using those terms exactly when I was explaining things, and then I decided to omit it because I didn't want to
yeah.
copyright infringe. No, I'm just kidding. But
No, no, no,
yeah,
because well, if you I mean some of the least part of watched part of the least watched part of one of the least watched parts of my channel are my rough drafts for Sunday.
mm,
But if someone really wanted to see, okay, well, what does Paul believe and how does he take all of the stuff he does with his midweek videos and try to communicate that to normal people
right,
in a 20 to 30 minute bite-sized chunk,
yeah,
well, there it is. And a lot of people look at that and say, yeah, but I hear a fair amount of just sort of common evangelical reformed.
mm,
Yeah, well, that's who I am.
hmm,
So
yeah,
my for a long in many of the early years, people were sort of waiting for me to do a Peterson or Vervaeke or Peugeot and sort of release to the world some big thing. And it's
hmm,
like, no, that's not really what I'm
hmm,
doing here. I'm trying to really understand what's going on. And I do make my own contributions of, metagelical and estuary, and I do make these words that really don't necessarily communicate that well.
mm,
But and then the TLC is people who, for whatever reason, have got nerdy enough and inside enough that they found some utility with this. And so then this TLC develops all of this insider jokes and insider language and insider. And
Yeah,
actually,
when you call the things that you do branding, I I that took me a little bit to get to understand.
that's Grim Grizz.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's from him.
Yeah.
And again, someone like Grim Grizz has made a huge contribution to many of us. But if you're going to sit down and figure out exactly what that dude is doing,
Mhm.
besides trying to make a living on a channel with 1,300 subs,
Yeah.
um, but he is, I said it, the guy is a genius. He's a mimetic genius. He is
Mm.
really smart and he's super intuitive. And if you actually can figure out what the heck he's doing, you can really learn some stuff.
You
But
know, it's
most
yeah.
people aren't going to give it that much time.
I showed in one of our class meetings on the Bible, I was teeing up Genesis with 3 weeks of just like preliminary discussion. One of the weeks was on who is God, and I talked a little bit about the idea of spirits and gods. And I showed a photo of the Statue of Liberty. I showed a photo of a mascot of Mount Rushmore, something else. Oh, an Oscar. And I said, "What are these?" And someone said logos. And then I said, "What's the difference between a logo and an idol?" And I think they got it. My point being, these are images of spirits, right? And so the branding, it kind of reminds me of that,
Yes.
where it's like, here's a little song that captures everything. Like it localizes and brings down everything. Mike Heiser had this paragraph in the Unseen Realm where he talks about you have to like breathe into or you have to do some ritual to open the mouth and the ear and the nose of the idol. You know what I mean? And I don't mean these in any sort of like evil paganism, anti-paganism thing. I mean like I'm just observing how these things work. And it's like you have to put on a ritual and then the spirit reveals itself. And then maybe you do that a few times over and over again, and then it continues to reveal itself. You know what I mean? And it like continues to come, what is this thing that's coming about as we continue to play this song or show this image or anything like that? You know what I mean?
No,
Um, and then
I
it's a
think you're right.
mysterious thing. Like when you look at a statue of Artemis from Ephesus, you're like, it's you can't discern what is on her body
Right.
until you keep looking at it and you keep learning about it. And then you're like, now I see it. Now, like these ideas, they have come about, and now I can actually see because yeah, anyway, I don't know if I'm going anywhere with that, but the branding, it makes sense to me because it like the branding is super obscure, and that's what I mean. It's like I don't understand how that's branding from a media perspective.
Right.
But then I if I just stop and think about it, I'm like, it's branding, you know?
Well, and Grid Grizz might be horribly offended if when, because he will watch this and he'll probably clip it and it will probably show up in his channel and it might
Oh,
even get included in some branding.
what have I got myself into?
Yeah, there, now you're in it. Now you're in it.
Uh-huh.
But it's deeply subversive, which he likes, but it's
Yeah.
also in a way fairly postmodern and
Hmm.
deconstructed. And there's a lot of that. So Damon Walter, who is has his own science fiction channel that he does, he follows the corner fairly closely, actually. He follows my videos and comments quite regularly. You know, his assertion is that basically Peterson is way more postmodern than he wants to admit, and I think he's right. And most of us in this corner are more postmodern than we'd like to admit, and I think he's right. We just don't want to admit it because we've got this whole political, left, right, anti-woke, blah blah blah, this stuff going on. But we, the emerging church, in many ways, the the seeker church was a very pragmatic, modern approach to ecclesiology in the late 20th century North America. And in many ways, it perfected many of the different movements that came towards it. The emergent church movement was an attempt to apply post-modernity to
Right.
this infrastructure. And of course, and what happened was that whole populations of children of evangelical boomers deconstructed and lost their faith.
Yeah.
And I think overall, the irony, there's a deep irony with the emerging church movement in that, in my experience, most of those people that became ex-evangelicals were sadder for it.
Mm.
Here was a movement that basically wanted to say, that these evangelicals, this is a psyop, this is
Mm.
brainwashing,
Right.
this is leading people into fantasy. We're
Hmm.
going to liberate these people and their Sunday mornings and their spare time and their tithe money. We're going to liberate them from all of that, and we are going to lean towards the common good.
Hmm.
Sort of understanding good in a very generic, experiential way. And in the end, a lot of them just became regular American, fairly godless consumers,
Mm.
and their marriages failed, and their children struggled, and just on a well-being, in a well-being
Mm.
measure, they probably would have been better staying evangelical.
Mm.
And I think at the bottom end of that, that's where you get this turn to orthodoxy,
Mhm.
where now we are going to rigorously help you reconstruct your life and your world and your archetypes with the patterns.
Yeah.
And praise God. But, you know, I saw that more often with, so a lot of I mentioned the guy who watches Mark Furtick, or is his name Mark?
Stephen
Stephen
Furtick.
Furtick, that's it. Um, this was a guy who grew up in a tremendously dysfunctional home, got into um, street gangs early on. Every one of his older brothers are either dead or incarcerated for life. I mean, this guy, when I met him, he was a
Mm.
very scary man, but we really hit it off, and he lived just a couple of doors down from church, and we have a great friendship. He still finds me sometimes when he needs something,
Mm.
but he needed a Pentecostal church that in some ways is like the Orthodox, because when you find one of these Pentecostal pastors who's been through prison and is used to
Right.
taking little gangbangers and ex-cons and this population in America and making him Christian, they
Mm.
are little tyrants. They're
Yeah.
like, to this, there was another guy who came through my church for a while. He was in prison, he was in juvie, and this pastor basically said, "I'm going to get you out of jail. I'm going to move you into my house, and you're going to follow every one of my rules.
Yeah.
And if you break one of my rules, I'm going to send you back to prison. If you
Right.
want to stay out of prison, you're going to clean your room. You're
Mm.
going to make your bed. You're going to be in church on Sunday." I mean, again, a whole lot of evangelicals and emergents would say, well, that's tyranny. But it's like,
Right.
yeah, but if you got a 13-year-old that's doing some time in juvie for some violence and some theft, this kid needs structure.
Hmm.
And this Pentecostal minister is going to give it to him.
Well,
And
and
there's
they
going to
call
be
them spiritual fathers
That's
more so.
right.
Yeah. So,
And,
I
and
mean,
that's what, in some ways, what the Orthodox Church is doing,
yeah.
but
No,
not with
seriously.
people who've been incarcerated, but people who need the structure.
Yeah. That's That's really a significant insight, and I have thought that as well. As you have the Roger Eyre re-enchanting book. I forget what it's called.
Living
But
in
yeah,
wonder.
Living in Wonder. He focuses on the sort of miracles of that are found within these more enchanted liturgical churches, and then the Pentecostals, you know what I mean, or the
Right,
charismatics, you know what I mean,
right.
because you can have a charismatic church that, like, technically our church would be, at least in its official teaching, we're not cessationist, but we don't practice the gifts on Sunday, you know what I mean, or whatever. Like, we're a Southern Baptist, church. I wouldn't necessarily call us seeker, but you know what I mean. The idea is like we're not doing anything that turns people off unnecessarily, you know. Um, but yeah, it is in the Pentecostal churches that you have the wacky, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have the um and then on the other side, I have no idea what to make of videos that I see on Instagram of people touching people's foreheads and then they're falling over. You know what I mean? In droves. Because my friends, I have been discipling a few guys who are newer to our church and newer to faith. I have my own little small Discord community of like that I just set up so people could have conversations, people in the community, people I meet, and stuff like that. And there's always posting questions. And one thing is they always send these Pentecostal videos of people falling over, things like that. And then they're like, "This is crazy. This isn't real." Like they say it's not real. Like,
Hmm.
and I or like there's something spiritual, like it's all fake, right? Like they'll
Yeah,
say it's all
yeah,
fake.
yeah, yeah.
And then I go along to get along, but I try to just say like something is happening here, guys. Like this doesn't just happen. Something is moving people to fall over. You know what I mean? Like, is it the Holy Spirit or is it not? I don't know, but something's happening, you know? And so you
Yeah.
can't just write it off. I just showed my wife last night a video like that, and she thought it was AI, and I was like, "This is real. Like, this is a real video, you know?" Uh, so I don't know what's happening, and I don't even know how we got to that point, but
Well, and you look at someone like John Mark Comer, and in some ways, John Mark Comer and the Renovare, the Dallas Willard, these guys are so the gangbanger who's in juvie, and if he does something else now that he's 16 or 17, then he's going to go to big prison, and
Mhm.
that's a whole nother thing. But that
Oh, I
guy
remember. Yeah.
that guy needs structure. But John Mark Comer is coming to people who they're not going to sift all the way to the bottom of the emergent thing.
Hmm.
They're going to sort of, like Dallas Willard did to a certain degree in his own life, there's going to get to a point where, okay, it's not going to be quite so kairos driven. It's going to be a
Hmm.
little bit more chronos driven. And we're going to practice meditation and we're going to practice prayer and the spiritual disciplines. But, again, I'm old enough to have seen this stuff. I mean, I sort of caught this on its first round with Richard Foster
Mm.
and Dallas Willard, and a
Yeah.
version of that came into the CRC. And so
Yeah.
these things are just sort of always around. And usually, one of the things you learn in ministry is that a lot happens when there's a crisis of some kind in someone's life
Hmm.
and there something has fallen through. And it's usually at those moments, and again, that's very Kairos driven, at those moments that, okay, now they've found John Mark Comer and they're going to live Jesus' way and
Hmm.
they're going to, I mean, that's John Mark
Yeah.
Comer is in some ways sort of emergent light.
Hmm. Hmm.
You don't have to go all the way down into postmodernity to understand that, it's sort of like James K. Smith from Calvin College too,
Mm.
the liturgies that are all around us, desiring the kingdom, all that stuff that he did. So there's, the
Yeah.
truth is that we're actually surrounded by quite a robust Christian ecosystem
Right.
that can engage a tremendously diverse population
Yeah.
in many of the places that they need it.
I remember the connection that I was trying to make, and that is Bill Johnson's
Yeah.
thing. Because we were talking about spiritual fathers and Bill Johnson's school of charisma, or I don't know what it's called, the spiritual gift school or whatever.
Yep.
That's a similar thing where you come under the tutelage, you know what I mean, and you're being taught the spiritual gifts and you're being programmed into these ways of doing things. And it reminds me of an Orthodox moment of you are being programmed to kiss the icon and you're being programmed, you see what I'm saying, to
Yep.
light the incense and these things and like, and this is essentially the overall thought that a question is that I again like that I am wrestling with is what is in the 21st century in 2025, what is the real difference between these? Like, is there is it literally just culture differences? You know what I mean? What is the if these things are manifesting in very similar ways, as far as like I don't know what Bill Johnson thinks about the Orthodox, you know what I mean? But if he's acting as a spiritual father, teaching people how to encounter like his own version of hesychasm, you know what I mean? Like, you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yes, yes,
what's
yes,
the
yes.
difference? And why are we, and I understand doctrine is important. I believe in it. You know what I mean? I
Yeah,
believe
yeah,
that these
yeah,
things are
yeah.
important. And I'm not necessarily like, I'm not a Bill Johnson guy. Again, like Joel Osteen, I've never really listened to him. I just know what people say about him. But I just wonder what is the difference, you know? That's what I'm wrestling with.
Well,
Are
there
these
are
things,
differences,
and then
but
people they
oh,
there are differences, but people act better for being whatever tradition they are when there's great similarities. I know there's great differences, you know what I mean? But it's like these things they have common foundational roots, you know what I mean, as far as what is actually happening, the psychotechnology, you know what I mean? It's all very similar but different. I don't know. It's my wrestle, if that makes sense. That's my question.
no, it's good. It's a good thing to wrestle with. I think it's beyond us. I don't think we have the perspective nor the necessity to try to finally fully categorize and um, sort of classify all of these things.
Right.
Finally, each of us must decide for ourselves and those that we're responsible for in terms of what the most faithful way to follow Jesus is,
Mm,
given the particularities and stories that we have.
hmm
And so the fact that we can see really interesting similarities between Pentecostals and Orthodox, and um, to me, I don't know, to me, it's just fun
It is fun.
to live in a place where, it's funny in Sacramento when in the 90s, when sort of the Iron Curtain came down and people could get out of these communist countries, a lot of people from the former Soviet bloc came to Sacramento. Many of them were Pentecostals.
Mm, interesting.
And it's so then you have to ask, okay, why do Pentecostal churches flourish in a place that has been saturated by orthodoxy?
Right.
When they walk in and have the stories of saints that haven't, decayed in the grave, and when they see the miracles. Now, by virtue sort of their first filter, they might deny that,
Mm,
but that's, I would see former Roman Catholics turn evangelico in Latin America, and
mm,
part of that Kairos transformation was usually a turn against. I
mm,
remember when I was at a synod when we were relegating a segment of the Heidelberg Catechism that was the language was pretty brutal towards the Catholic Mass. And as a synod, we were relegating that language to a footnote because
mm,
there had been long conversations between CRC scholars and Roman Catholic scholars, where the Roman Catholic scholars are basically walking this through and saying, it could be that this language is not actually fair to even what Catholics themselves understand the Mass to be. And it was the Hispanics who had grown up in Latin America who were the ones that were fighting hardest to not relegate that language to a footnote.
mm,
So there's always a certain tension between groups, but two people that fight hotly over something often share a tremendous amount in common
mm,
that gives fuel for that heat.
hmm
So and here in North America, with all of the diversity, with all of the freedom, with all of the chaos, the fact that in any major given city in North America, you're going to have how many different versions and instantiations of Christianity. Well, it's a rather breathtaking thing. And there are, the good thing about it is that, well, if you're looking for a brand of Christianity, you ought to be able to find something that's
Yeah.
close.
And I think that's a blessing
Yeah.
personally. What I get, my personal angst is when people get so uppity about their own, you know what I mean, that they get tribal, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think about Paul and what I want to focus on in my life is the idea of multiple parts of the body. Um, that we're made, one's made to be a hand and one's made to be a foot. And, you
Yeah.
know, and what unity, the unity that Jesus prays for in John 17, I think it is, um, people make that out, turn that into an exclusionary tone. You know what I mean? That it's like if you're not with us, then you're against us on
Yeah.
this particular issue. And I think it's the reverse. It's the unity there is that we would share a common fellowship in the spirit and understand what the spirit is, and then these, and Gavin Ortland talks a lot about the triage and the first and second order issues and things like that, and I just wonder, like, is that what metagelical is that what that represents, is the sort of ingathering of like a lot of different, like a Bishop Barron and you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know who else it would be, but you know, like you have Bishop Barron and Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pajot. You know, one's not a Christian, right? Quote unquote. One's a Roman Catholic bishop, and you know, one's an icon carver in the Eastern Orthodox. And I, Megachurch, you know, PK, am listening to them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So, you know, anyway. So
Evangelicals figured out how to transcend confessional differences to work together
great.
productively and to like each other and to build friendships. And that is now that Protestant capacity is now enfolding Roman Catholics
Yeah.
and Orthodox. And so
So are we at the end of Protestantism?
only if you imagine Protestantism won. Because
Hmm.
there's a weird reality with a lot of things in the world that if you actually win, you sort of lose yourself and you
Yeah.
become just part of the scenery. And when I look at this, I've been reading, R.R. Reno's Return of the Strong Gods, and in a sense, a certain kind of post-war liberalism won.
Mm, hmm.
And once it, and Christianity, I think it's part of what's behind Tom Holland's thesis. To a certain degree, elements of Christianity just simply won, and they won to such a degree that it became invisible. We didn't
Yeah.
see it anymore. It was just
The air we
simply
breathe.
assumed. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the air we breathe.
Yeah.
So I think certain elements of Protestantism have just simply won,
Mm,
and has that Orthodox and Roman Catholics and even atheists just sort of see it as just the way things are.
yeah.
Now, if you're trying to increase your tribe by pointing to a differentiation and a difference and a brand, let's say, it doesn't help you. So often when I have the experience of, I just had a guy came in to clean the carpet on the stage, and when someone right off the street that I know nothing about asks me, "What kind of church are you?"
Hmm. Yeah.
I've, for a long time back when we had a landline here, I would battle that on the phone. People would just call,
Yeah.
"What kind of church are you?" And
Yeah.
my next question is, tell me about the categories you have for church. But that question isn't going to go anywhere.
Hmm.
Um, a Christian church. Oh, so you're not Catholic.
Hmm.
It just
I hear that
depends on their
all the
categories.
time at our church that has people
Yep.
from the Catholic Church come to, is when I became a Christian.
Yep.
I grew up Catholic, but now I'm a Christian. I'm at a
Yep.
Christian church.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
think I hear it all the time. And it's, yeah. I don't even know how to respond to it. I just sort of smile and nod, you know what I mean? Because it's not like that's their lived experiences. They see themselves as like making a conversion jump, you know what I mean? Whereas for me, I see I don't know when Christ touched their heart. You know what I mean? Like I don't know when that happened, you know? That's what made you a Christian, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so that's how I, you know, anyway, it's I yeah. I I I really do wonder where we're going. Like my son is 7.5 months, and I just wonder when he's my age, how it'll look and where he's going to go. You know what I mean?
And
What's going to be
yeah,
church for him, you know? Um, so
I look back. I mean, I remember when I was in college thinking everything's been invented. Got airplanes, we got cars, we got phones. And the cell phone came along. It's like, wow, that's something.
mhm.
And the VCR came around. It's like, wow, that's something. And cable TV came around. It's like, wow, that's something. And then the internet happened. It's like, we have no idea what these things mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the time your son is our age, I have no idea what the world is going to look like.
Yeah.
I really don't. But
Yeah. Yep. All we can do is it's a cliche statement, but it's like you either are building an ark, right? Or you are that's the flotilla language, right?
yeah,
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 that's the flotilla language. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, that's yeah. You're building an ark or you are you know, on Mars Hill or you're I don't, you know what I mean? Like you're doing something, you know what I mean? That's all you can do because you don't know the future. Um
Well, in true TLC, we don't actually talk about this a lot, but it is sort of, this flotilla. And every now and then you have the question, well, is this a flotilla on the water or is this a flotilla in space? I mean, is this Battlestar
mm,
Galactica?
mm,
Probably the more the AI goes, will probably be more and more Battlestar Galactica,
yeah.
where we've just got these group of ships that are, sort of differently tasked, but we
Mhm.
cling together and we try to make it through the robot apocalypse together. So,
Yeah. 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 You don't know if you're Noah building the ark before the flood came. You know what I mean? Are you building it as the flood happens, or are you before it even happens, you know? So and as you said, are we going to be fighting our robot overlords? You know what I mean? Like AI concerns me greatly personally, and
yeah,
that's I say that as someone who uses it fairly frequently.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So it's a strange thing. I know we've been going for a while, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I really appreciate you
Oh, well,
conversing with
thank
me as
you.
I've been able to process some thoughts that I have.
No, this has been fun. It's been a great conversation. It's fun. I mean, you're well versed in the church world. You know your stuff biblically and theologically, and you've spent enough time here in the TLC that you've grabbed elements of this, even though you don't know. Boy,
Yeah,
when
I'm
certain
trying to
people hear that
understand.
you didn't know Grail country, they'll
Yeah, I hear these things all the time.
I
It's really
understand.
hard for me to discern what these things are, so it takes me a little bit. And so I've heard Grail Country a lot.
No,
Um,
no need to apologize. Trust me.
I
No
feel like
need
I'm
to
always trying to
apologize.
understand. I'm always trying. There's so many voices on the internet, and they all are like, and I'm just trying to understand what they want from me, I guess is the point. Like they want me in their tribe, they want me in they
Like
want
and subscribe
yeah,
and
like and
become a
subscribe.
member.
They want me to join their body.
Yeah,
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 and so but I just I'm trying to understand. So on the Bible side of things, even that too, it's like there's so many things that everything is in flux if it
yeah,
is how I see it. Like the conversation around certain points is so in flux. I'm a young guy and it's changed dramatically as long as I've been interested in in these things,
yeah,
um like John MacArthur I feel like had his day, and like I don't know who's talking about John MacArthur anymore. um but back in the day, for me back in the day, it was like John MacArthur was the thing, so I don't,
yeah.
not for me. I'm just saying what
Right.
I would hear people talk about.
Oh, yeah,
I,
yeah. He was hot stuff.
and
Still is
again,
in
he's
some
another one of
corners.
those where I probably have never even listened to something that you've said. So I don't know if I would be for him or against him, but
Well, Ready
um,
for Harvest just put out a video, all the
I did
things
listen
that
to that
John
actually.
MacArthur
Yeah, no,
believes.
I
I,
did
I
listen to
listened to
that.
half of it.
So
It
there
was
were
kind
things.
of interesting because
Oh, something I was going to say, and I know we were wrapping up, but this came back to the postmodern thing that I forgot to say, and I just wanted to drop it just
I
for
can get a
the.
new water bottle. Keep talking.
Oh, I was just going to say, when we are all more postmodern than we like to admit, I thought that the I understand why the young earthers are so mad about young earth, about old earth interpretations. Um, and that is because they are modernists and the old earthers are postmodernists.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you like uh, get or like if you agree with that, but they have this view that there are not multiple layers or ways of truth, like multiple truths, kinds of truths,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
multi and so that came to my mind, and so that came up with the John MacArthur thing. Is he's a, I think one of the reasons why he hasn't had why I said he has had his day and people have moved on is because of the postmodernism sort of won a little bit, and he is a modernist. You know what I mean? Anyway, and I say this as someone who is theologically conservative, I myself I'm not a young earther, but I guess the point is like what it says is what it says, and that's a material truth, and there are no layers to truth, or there are no different versions of truth, or whatever, what have you, and it's like the Pajot side of things, it's like there are layers to truth, and there's meanings that are different than there's causal meanings and then there's material meanings and then there's symbolic and those things touch at different points and you know what I mean? So it's just anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a positivism
Mm.
beneath MacArthur. And again, I mean, part of what happens is there are very peculiar bedfellows as things go, because if you look at Comte and positivism, I mean, what Comte wanted to do was sort of establish a church apart from Christian tradition.
Mm.
We'll have the best popular music. I mean, and so that's sort of the peak of positivism. And then you get these Christians that are positivists down the line, where what Comte tried to do would just be absolute heresy to these people.
Mm.
And so yeah, MacArthur's just an odd duck all the way around, because on one hand, he's sort of reformed, and on the other hand, he's sort of dispensational. You
Yeah, I
know,
know. He's got a weird bag. I have a
yeah.
friend who he was a leader of a local chapter of an LGBTQ some organization. And in the last like 3 years, I think he's been baptized and he's married with his child now, and he's a bodybuilder and all these things. And he loves MacArthur. And as someone who is like, so it's fun. And we get into our I'm not a Calvinist, by the way, but we get into our Calvinist discussions and things
You're a
like that.
Southern Baptist, but not a Calvinist Southern
Yeah.
Baptist. Not the
Yeah.
not the Al Mohler variety.
No. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Al
It
Mohler, well,
gets
again, I said
complicated.
the Rick Warren side of things because Rick Warren had that whole thing public anger
Oh yeah.
about the women in ministry thing, the video that came out and I think Al Mohler is the other, yeah, he would be the opposed, yeah, in that video.
But
Uh,
he's also reformed. So I mean,
right.
I mean, it's so funny. We've got some Mormons in the TLC.
Mm.
Just someone, in fact, I haven't watched the video. Someone posted on Twitter, basically made a video that said how Paul Vanderklay brought me back to the LDS church, and I thought, oh boy, wait till
Yeah.
I get to Synod and somebody's going to play this for me. Say,
Wow.
what are you doing, Vanderklay? You're making
Yeah.
people Orthodox. You're making people Mormon. Why don't you make people CRC? You're sure
Hmm.
doing something wrong.
But all those
I
people in those camps are interested in what you have to say about CRC, right? Because you
Yeah, they
talk about,
are.
yeah, so that's
And they're
really
going to be very
interesting.
frustrated because
The
I'm going
amount
to
of,
be at
yeah,
Synod for like a week and a half and I can't make any videos. There's a gag order. So,
the amount of times I heard when the Pope was elected that like I've never paid attention to a Pope in my life, and
right.
now like I am suddenly interested in this thing. That's maybe that metagelical moment. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Something. Okay. I didn't want to keep you. Uh, I am. This is just my like going out on a limb. I'm 2 hours south of you. If I wanted to bring estuary to my church, what would that look like? And is there any way we could have you come out and do a training, or you would be willing to do that? Okay,
Sure,
cool.
sure.
Awesome. Well,
You
maybe we
you
could
could
email back
you
and
could
forth.
get me and Vendonk, I bet.
That would be amazing because I sent my dad, the senior pastor of this church, the intro to estuary, the sample estuary video. I don't know if he watched them. I'll have to ask him about it. But when I pitched estuary to him, he was like, "This is a great idea. I would love something like this." And he's a very open guy. He is not one of he's not very dogmatic about, like we have our programming, and he's like, we put as many fish hooks in the water as possible, is his view. We open up as many doors as possible. We open up as many groups as possible. His dad, my grandpa, did street Pentecostal tent ministries for prostitutes and gang members. You know what I mean? Like, and so it's like the goal is to just be open spaces for people to come and see is the campaign.
Yep.
So he was really on board. And I would love to bring Estuary to North Point, which
Yeah,
the church is
I'll
called North
if
Point
you
Church. And
that
it's not the
what we
Andy
can
Stanley North Point. I'll just say that. It's not the Andy
I
Stanley.
figured that out.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But
No,
I yeah, no, absolutely. And we can find a time and I'll come down and Vendonk will come down. The
that'd be
thing
awesome.
the thing about estuary is that it's in some ways I think more Chronos and less
Yeah,
Kairos in that it's I've now been doing it every week at my church since January 2024. And it's really good when you do it every week because the bonds between people really
absolutely.
solidify. So a
Our
lot of
church,
pastors, yeah,
yeah, our church is it's big on the Sunday morning bringing people in, but there's always something happening during the week. It is a very living, vibrant organism. And so I know that a few estuary groups would start up at our church. So,
I wouldn't be, and I've sort of been waiting. You know, we've had fairly good success starting them sort of all over the world. I've been amazed how transcultural it has been. But if you've got a group of people that like to meet together and are fairly open-minded and like to talk about different things, this protocol just really works well. I mean,
yeah.
again, I thought I had wondered because again, we do it every week, and our group at church is really fairly small. There's about 6 to 8 of us who are there every
Hmm.
week. And I wondered after, 50 reps or something, would we get tired of this? Would we be all talked
Mm,
out? And the answer is no. We've
mm,
actually gone deeper. And what surprises people is that there's no Bible study, there's no
hmm,
agenda, and
hmm,
you'd think, well, maybe these people coming together couldn't do this. And now, again, we do have some people that are really good at it in that they bring in interesting topics and they know how
hmm,
to have a conversation. But
hmm.
I've been more surprised that more churches haven't looked at this because, so John Van Donk was actually up last week. He came up for something else, and so he's there at Estuary. And just in terms of, I, I've got because of the history of my church, I've got a fair number of older African American women. Some of them grew up in the Jim Crow South. They're now in their 80s, and they are just the most amazing people. They've got the most incredible stories from a different world than, Sacramento. And finally got one of these women in. I've been trying to get her in for a while because I knew she would love it, and she did. She just took to it. But as a pastor, so often you get called in when there's a crisis.
Mm,
And when you come into a crisis, you're usually coming in sort of as a fire brigade.
mm.
You need to put out a fire, you need to do triage and stabilize the people, and then you need to figure out, okay, what kind of long-term discipleship, therapy, healing, what do they need to sort of, let's say, get this marriage back on good footing or get these people
Right.
stabilized so that they can be okay in a marriage. I mean, you're doing this kind of thing. And unfortunately, what that means is that you so often don't get a lot of the personal insight into someone's life.
Mm,
You don't get their stories. You don't
hmm
know what they're really anxious about. You don't know what they're really joyful about. And so much of what you get in estuary is those insights into their lives. And what you're finding is that people are building real relationships with each other there. Now, again, I've seen that happen for years in the context of Bible studies, small group ministries with various programming, and we've done serendipity. We've done like Bible study fellowship that our denomination sort of hacked. We've done a lot of different things, but in each case, always there's some pretext of, well, it's going to be Bible study, or this
You're
is going to
right.
be, teaching doctrine or something like that, or maybe
Right.
addressing a particular thing. And this is just so open-ended that the truth
Right.
is, I find it gets into the nooks and crannies of people's lives that I wouldn't necessarily have known. This is kind of a this there's a problem in this person's life that they're going to have to sort of work out. And it sure is nice to get it to start working at it when it's not a crisis.
hmm hmm
Because once, I've had dogs over the years, and the thing is, dogs, they might get hot spots or infections or something, and then they start chewing at it, and then you got to put up the cone, and you have all these things you got to do. Well, in many cases, early intervention where they can, you can prevent deconstructions, you can prevent
Yeah.
blow-ups in marriages, you can prevent conflicts going on in the church just because people are they don't even know they're necessarily heading to a crisis. But if you're
Right.
a pastor and you've seen enough of these things, someone starts going there, it's like, I gotta watch this because
Yeah.
I've seen that develop that, and we
Yeah.
don't want that, and they sure don't want that. So,
Yeah.
and I've just found estuary to just be a very healthy
hmm
practice of the body.
Yeah. The amount of times that I have wished that I could find an opportunity to bring my father-in-law, my wife's deconstructed dad, to or wish that they had had something like that. Her parents, they were very isolationist in their. They had church hurt. Who knows for what reason? But they sort of were very reclusive churchgoers, and then their family blew up. And I have sent him, I think, one of your videos before, but I don't think he watched it. I've sent him John Vervaeke before, uh, and I don't think he's watched it. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he has, but
The nice thing about estuary is that we have at our group in Sacramento a few people that come pretty much every week, and they are not Christians.
hmm
They just come for the flat out quality of the conversation.
hmm
Now, I'm not saying that it couldn't happen that someone who's got a real hurt with a church can get into a group and they just can't leave that doggone thing alone. And that wouldn't bother some church people. But I found the estuary protocol to be amazingly disarming
right,
in that people, they want to have a good conversation. They really do. They don't want to have a fight. They don't want to bicker. They
yeah,
don't want to get into a squabble. And
yeah,
when, say, a couple people in the group sort of want to, the rest of the group sort of, push,
they back off, yeah,
yep, says, well, let's not go there. Let's talk about this thing over
yeah,
here that we can actually enjoy each other through.
yeah. That's
So
important. That's important.
it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think it would be amazing. So yeah, I'll email you then if that's all right,
Yeah,
and
email
we
me
can.
and maybe we'll find a time and
Yeah.
yeah, and
Okay.
that would be and John and I, if we get depending on how many people would come, let's say the first night, I mean, John and I could be in different groups and all we do to teach it is we just do it
Yeah.
because it's simple. Just,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
what we do.
I liked the sample. There was a sample I think that was
Yep.
shot at a conference or something like that.
Yep.
And I thought that that was powerful. And I can see we would just need some time to announce it from the stage to get people on board, to introduce them to the idea. My wife wrote a book that we just like a It's called Living Temple. It's about embodied discipleship. And we just did, she had a co-author and we got everyone on board and we had like 700 people go through the book, you know what I mean? As a 6 week
Yeah.
group, you know what I mean? And so it was
Wow.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
And
The
so
mega churches can do those kind of
yeah,
things.
they
They
can
got
do it.
that
And
scale.
so I don't know how that works for Estuary. I don't imagine 'cause that was a church-wide small group
Yeah.
Bible study, but we did it.
Yeah.
And we had people hosting it. We had groups meeting on the church campus every week, twice a week, and we just did it. You know what I mean? And so
Yep.
again, that doesn't map one to one with what Estuary is doing, but I'm just saying we would need some time to sort of get some volunteers who would want to lead it, who want to be trained in leading it.
Yep.
Obviously, they have to go through it themselves already, so the training could be them doing it, you know. And
Yep.
I already think of people who would I have a feeling they would want to do it. So anyway, just wanted to pitch that. That
No,
was my other.
absolutely. And actually, I think churches do people have worked this without churches and just
Mm.
done it on their own and
Great,
stuff.
great. Yeah.
But churches tend to do it really well, especially churches that have a lot of experience with small group
Mm,
dynamics, because a
mm.
lot of it is just small group dynamics. Okay, this
Right,
person's talking a little too much. That person probably
right.
hear a little more from them, and just
Yeah,
very subtle ways to help the group stay balanced. And but it's
yeah,
yeah, John and I both had, tons of small group experience, so it just
yeah.
goes really easily.
I love it, and I appreciate your openness to that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'll just email you, and I appreciate again your willingness to talk. As someone who has had hours and hours now of your voice in my headphones while I'm doing the dishes, it's fun to get the chance to have a back and forth.
Well,
Um,
you're okay with me sharing this conversation?
I am, yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
was wondering if I would share any things that I wouldn't want online, but yes, absolutely, yeah,
Okay. Good.
yeah,
Good.
yes.
Good.
Well,
Well,
thank you
this has
so
been
much.
great, and I really look forward to meeting you in person and seeing your church.
That
And
would be
yeah, I
awesome.
think I think John and I would love nothing better than to help your church play with this.
That would be great. All
All
right.
right.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate you.
Okay. Take care,
Okay.
Eric.
Bye.
Bye bye.